Chapter 661. That was the River of Destiny, the place where the fate of all living beings gathered. It was also the most mysterious place in the primordial world. Rumble. The River of Destiny was vast and boundless. It appeared from the mysterious and unknown void and spanned between heaven and earth. It was vast and mighty, passing through the past, present, and future. Countless universes appeared clearly in front of everyone. At this moment, all living beings who raised their heads to look at the River of Destiny found a trace of their future trajectory in the vast river. Vaguely, some living beings seemed to have understood something. They grasped a trace of opportunity from the future and had the possibility of confirming their Tao. However, most of them still gained nothing. They looked at the River of Destiny blankly, not knowing what had happened. Boom! Suddenly, an inexplicable vibration shook the entire primordial world and attracted everyone's attention. Just as everyone was puzzled, they saw a shocking change in the human race. Terrifying destiny rose and rushed straight to the River of Destiny. It gradually merged with the tributary that represented the destiny of the human race in the River of Destiny. At the same time, in the void, the phantoms of the 5 elements, sacred beasts, suddenly appeared. They were accompanied by terrifying dragon roars, phoenix cries, Chelan roars, tiger roars, and turtle roars that shook the entire primordial world. Rumble. With the appearance of the 5 elements, sacred beasts, the River of Destiny changed again. Among the countless tributaries of destiny, 5 of them were countless times larger than the other tributaries. They were like vast rivers that suddenly changed their trajectories and flowed towards the destiny of the human race, converging with it. After that, countless mysterious shadows appeared in the sky above the River of Destiny. Each of them represented a tributary and gathered towards the destiny of the human race. These mysterious shadows were formed from the destiny of the myriad races. The tributaries of the River of Destiny that they represented converged into the human race, which meant that the destiny of the myriad races was flowing towards the human race, harming the myriad races to raise the human race. In terms of destiny, the human race could be said to be number 1 in the primordial world. However, if one wanted to become the main character of the world, being number 1 was not enough, because number 1 was only the strongest. It did not mean that one was invincible. The second, third, fourth, and even later existences might be able to defeat the first if they joined forces. Therefore, if the human race wanted to truly become the main character of the world, they had to suppress the primordial world in terms of destiny. Even if all the factions of the primordial world joined forces, they would not be able to suppress the human race in terms of luck. He had gathered the destiny of all races in order to establish the destiny of the human race to suppress the primordial world. However, luck suppressing the primordial world was only the beginning. Afterwards, as the human race developed, its karmic luck would grow stronger and stronger until it completely devoured the karmic luck of all other races and occupied the entire river of fate. In fact, take the human Tao and replace it, to redefine humanity with the human race. Rumble. Under the infusion of the providence of the myriad races, the providence of the human race became stronger and stronger. One could see that the tributary that represented the karmic luck of the clan within the River of Destiny was growing wider and wider as countless tributaries poured into it. Crash! It was like the sound of a flowing river, clearly transmitted to everyone's ears. It was the sound of the river of fortune flowing. Now, under the blessing of the myriad race's providence, his appearance had changed greatly. If the human race's karmic luck had been a small river before, then the human race's karmic luck was now as vast and boundless as an ocean, vast and deep. This was the current river of fortune of the human race. He could no longer be called a tributary. In the vast River of Destiny, the countless tributaries became smaller and smaller, almost to the point where they could not be seen with the naked eye. On the other hand, the destiny of the human race was the opposite. He was like a vast ocean, occupying the center of the river of destiny and flowing towards the unknown. The river was so vast that it almost occupied more than half of the river of destiny, squeezing the living space of the other tributaries of destiny. And in the process of flowing, some smaller tributaries of the river of destiny began to slowly merge into it under the summoning of an inexplicable force, becoming a part of the river of destiny of the human race. Boom! The river of destiny was so vast that it could be said to be boundless, and the destiny of the human race could occupy half of it. From this, it could be seen that the destiny of the human race had far surpassed that of the Magi and demon race at their peak. Even the celestial sect of wonders could not be compared to it, and this was the protagonist of heaven and earth. Not only was he number one, but he also used the power of a single race to monopolize more than half of the primordial world's destiny, completely eliminating the possibility of others surpassing him. Otherwise, he could not be called the protagonist of heaven and earth. The protagonist of heaven and earth. He was the protagonist of the primordial world, his glory illuminating the entire primordial world, and he was unparalleled. If his glory was overshadowed by others, how could he still be called the protagonist? Boom! Just as the destiny of the human race reached its peak, suddenly, a supreme pressure spread out from the river of destiny. The strength of that power caused the entire primordial world to tremble. Then a resplendent Tao light erupted, even more dazzling than the sun, illuminating the boundless universe and countless space-time. That was Exanhua, the symbol of the human race's destiny. He appeared, rose slowly from the river of destiny. His glory was so resplendent. Even the sun and moon could not compare. Boom! 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 The moment Exanhua appeared, the destiny of the human race suddenly began to shake violently and released a mysterious power that spread throughout the entire human race in an instant. And under the influence of this power, all kinds of mysterious insights arose in the hearts of many human experts. At this moment, their understanding of the great Tao had deepened, and they had a deep understanding of things that they did not understand before. Their realms were increasing, almost as if they were blessed. All the human experts chose to break through at this moment. Boom! 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 Powerful auras rose from the human race and brazenly collided with the river of destiny, causing it to shake nonstop. Then, specks of light that looked like stars rose from the river of fate and disappeared into the void. This was someone was proving the Tao, transcending from the river of destiny. Boom! Dozens of powerful auras rose from the human territory, vast and mighty, filling the entire primordial world. That powerful pressure made all living beings feel reverence from the bottom of their hearts. Daluo Jinxian. Someone in the human race had become a Daluo Jinxian, and it was not just one, but a total of 36. At the moment when the human race became the protagonist of the world, under the surge of destiny, it actually gave birth to a total of 36 Daluo Jinxian for the human race. 36 Daluo Jinxian. Although it was far from being comparable to the Magi and demons at their peak, it was indeed the number one in the primordial world. There was no other race with such a foundation. Moreover, the 36 Daluo Jinxian were only the beginning. Under the infusion of the human race's destiny, even more human experts fell into Tao enlightenment. It would not be long before more Daluo Jinxian were born in the human race. At the very least, it would not be much less than before. And this was under the restrictions of the world. If the heavenly Tao was willing to let go of the restrictions, just the infusion of destiny just now would be able to give birth to no less than 100 Daluo Jinxian for the human race. But unfortunately, the world had changed. The cultivation environment of the ancient times was no longer there. The current primordial world had completely become the postnatal era. The laws of heaven and earth seemed to be covered with a layer of gauze, becoming hazy and difficult to comprehend. It was more than 100 times more difficult than in the ancient times. In addition to the other restrictions, if the living beings wanted to become Daluo Jinxian, it could be said to be thousands or tens of thousands of times more difficult than ancient cultivators. It could even be said that, if the living beings wanted to become Daluo Jinxian, the difficulty was exactly the same as the difficulty of the ancient cultivators to become quasi-saints. From this, it could be seen the difficulty of the living beings to attain the Tao. In other words, it was almost impossible for the living beings to attain the realm of Daluo Jinxian through normal means. This was a restriction of the heavenly Tao on all living beings. There were too many Daluo Jinxian in the primordial world, but the world did not need so many Daluo Jinxian. Therefore, the heavenly Tao placed a restriction on the world, increasing the difficulty of attaining the Tao. It was fine if there were Daluo Jinxian in the past, but in the future, not too many Daluo Jinxian would be allowed to appear. This could be considered a punishment of the heavenly Tao for cultivators. The reason why cultivators were getting worse with each generation was not only because the cultivation environment was getting worse, but also because the heavenly Tao was deliberately restricting them. Even under such circumstances, the destiny of the human race could still give birth to 36 Daluo Jinxian for the human race. It could be seen how powerful the destiny of the human race was, and the strength of the destiny of the human race was not only shown. Under the Daluo Jinxian, there were more Tai Jinxian and Golden Immortals breaking through. It could be said that, as the human race became the main character of the world, the strength of the human race as a whole increased by a large level. With so many experts breaking through, almost all the spiritual energy in the human territory was squeezed dry. Even the heavenly cycle palace, which the human race had the most, was not enough. If the human race's destiny was not strong enough to directly draw innate spiritual energy from the heavenly realm, the spiritual energy in the human territory would not be enough to support the breakthrough of so many experts. After this, the only shortcoming of the human race has been completely fixed. In the heavenly court, the South Pole Emperor quietly watched the changes of the human race, his heart filled with joy. The sudden change really brought him a huge surprise. One had to know that although the human race was strong in the past, it was obviously abnormal. There were many low-level cultivators, and they could be said to be the most powerful in the primordial world. Excluding Feng Zichen, there were also the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, these 8 supreme experts. However, there were really too few middle-level and high-level cultivators. Daluo Jinxian was only in his 30s, obviously not worthy of the identity of the main character of the world. However, under the infusion of destiny, the strength of the human race suddenly increased to a level that was enough to match the identity of the main character of the world. In Feng Zichen's eyes, the strength of the human race was still far from being comparable to the shamans and demons at their peak. However, in the current primordial world, it was enough. They deserved to be number 1. Even if the 4 great sage orthodoxies attacked together, they were far from being a match for the human race. It could be said that under the infusion of destiny, the changes of the human race in this short period of time were comparable to the changes of the human race's normal development for tens of millions of years. This change, who would it be? Who would be unhappy? Not to mention Feng Zichen. The human race's destiny skyrocketed, and even the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors who were cultivating in the Fire Cloud Cave received some benefits, and their strength increased to varying degrees. Even Nuwa, who was far away in the chaos outside the heavens, was also affected, and her strength suddenly increased by a large margin. However, for them, the improvement of their strength was secondary. The main thing was that with the improvement of their destiny, their understanding of the Tao had become deeper. Especially for Fuxi, the improvement of his destiny was even more significant. With the blessing of the human race's destiny, he who already had a deep foundation truly saw the possibility of attaining the Tao. It was estimated that it would not be long before he could take that crucial step and cultivate into the primordial Daluo Jinxian. This kind of power was not the power brought by the quasi-saint karmic rank, but the power that truly belonged to him, the primordial Daluo Jinxian. The karmic rank only brought him the power comparable to the primordial Daluo Jinxian, but it did not deprive him of the possibility of continuing to improve. The two did not conflict. On the contrary, the two complemented each other. Karmic rank was the authority of the primordial world. Having a karmic rank, it was like the authorities were giving you a cheat. With the blessing of the karmic rank, the cultivation speed would be faster. Similarly, the stronger one was, the more perfect the power brought by the karmic rank could be. It was true that the power of the karmic rank was very strong, but this did not mean that the person with the karmic rank was weak. In other words, even the current 6 sages, even if they had suddenly lost their sage karmic rank, they were still the supreme masters who suppressed the primordial world. This was because they had already cultivated into the realm of the primordial Daluo Jinxian with the blessing of the sage karmic rank. The 6th heaven of the sage was the 6th heaven of the primordial chaos. In terms of the essence of the realm, there was no difference between the two. The only difference was that the former could control the power of the way of heaven, while the latter could not. As the supreme masters of the human race, the 3 sovereigns, 5 emperors, and Nuwa had all benefited. In terms of contribution to the human race, Feng Zichen, who was also the North Star Emperor, would naturally benefit more than them. Boom, on the North Star, an invisible force descended with a loud rumble. It ignored all the restrictions and formations and directly blasted on the light cocoon formed by the North Star Emperor in the North Star Palace. The North Star Emperor, who was at the critical moment of transformation and was only half a step away, directly took the last step with the help of this force and completed the final transformation. Bang! There was a shocking explosion, and the light cocoon formed by the North Star Emperor shattered and turned into light spots that filled the sky and disappeared. At the same time, a supreme pressure swept out in all directions with the North Star as the center. In the blink of an eye, it spread to the entire primordial world. Whoosh! At this moment, the world went silent. In front of this supreme pressure, the world seemed to have frozen. Time and space stopped moving, and the rules also stopped operating. Only on the North Star, a figure that was surrounded by Taoist rhymes and filled with a mysterious aura slowly appeared. That was the North Star Emperor. He had attained the Tao. In a trance, endless light bloomed from his body. It was extremely bright, and the world lost its color. Only the bright light of the Tao filled the air. P.S. Today is the birthday of my book friend, the Sky Guide. I would like to say to him, Happy birthday! I hope he can see it. Chapter 662. However, very soon, the unbelievably bright Tao light began to fade. Like flowing water, the Tao light that shrouded the entire Eldritch universe vanished in the blink of an eye and gathered behind the North Star Emperor. After a series of distortions, the bright Tao light gradually dimmed and endless mysterious runes appeared. Not long after, the Tao light completely disappeared. A long river made of innate runes replaced his position and floated behind the North Star Emperor, bobbing up and down. That was the Great Tao River. It was formed by the North Star Emperor's Great Tao and was more than 3,000 miles long. It represented the North Star Emperor's 3rd heaven of primordial chaos. That's right, it was the 3rd heaven. With the help of the postnatal providence, the North Star Emperor's position, and the human race's providence, the North Star Emperor broke through to the 3rd heaven of primordial chaos. That was the benefit of having a karmic rank. It was fine if he did not break through, but once he did, he would break through to the next realm. Ordinary people could not be envious. Rumble. The Great Tao River was vast and mighty. It was only 3,000 miles long, but it gave people a feeling that it was incomparably huge. It was like a bridge of heaven and earth that pierced through the entire world and emanated endless majesty. Splash! Suddenly, the great Tao River moved. Endless innate runes flowed like flowing water and made splashing sounds, breaking the peace of heaven and earth. Then, as if something was broken, heaven and earth resumed its flow. Time and space were no longer stagnant, and the laws began to operate again. Everything returned to normal. Rumble. The moment heaven and earth returned to normal, countless great Taos and laws appeared in the sky at the same time and gathered toward the North Star. When one person achieved the Tao, thousands of Taos came to congratulate him. That was the sign of achieving the Tao. Almost at the same time, a hazy figure appeared in front of everyone. He stood at the peak of heaven and earth. He was only the size of an ordinary person, but he gave people the feeling that he was as vast as heaven and earth. It was as if he was the incarnation of the Tao. No, not the incarnation of the Tao, nor the carrier of the Tao. Instead, he was the Tao. Praise the North Star Upper Palace's Heavenly Emperor Infinite. Praise the West's Heavenly Emperor of Supreme Polarity Infinite. Praise the West's Heavenly Emperor of Supreme Polarity Infinite. Almost involuntarily, the living beings could not help but worship the Gauchan star and praise it. After that, not long after all the living beings bowed, the phenomenon of flowers falling from the sky and golden lotuses surging from the ground suddenly appeared in the heavens and the earth, and boundless auspicious aura suffused the air. It could be said that, following the North Star's attainment of the Tao, a joyous atmosphere pervaded the entire wilderness. This was the heavenly Tao's blessing to the North Star Emperor. The North Star Emperor's attainment of the Tao was celebrated by everyone. This treatment was almost comparable to that of a saint. As the supreme of heaven and earth, the innate sword ancestor, the sage emperor of the human race, the post-celestial Tao ancestor, and the great Taoist priests, great Emperor Gauchan was qualified to do so. If the heavens and earth did not bless him when he attained the Tao, given the vastness of the primordial world, who was qualified to receive the blessings of the world when they attained the Tao? After all, in a sense, the status of the North Star Emperor was even more honorable than that of a sage. Not to mention anything else. The 3 words, great Taoist priests, were enough to make the North Star Emperor stand at the top of the untainted land and be worshipped by all living beings. The North Star Emperor has attained the Tao. The great divine masters, who were awakened by the commotion of the human race, stared blankly at the North Star Emperor's attainment of the Tao. Even though they had thousands of words in their hearts, they could not say a single word. Even though they knew that the North Star Emperor would attain the Tao at any time, everyone was already mentally prepared. However, when this scene really happened, it still brought great shock to the great divine masters of the primordial world. Even the great Emperor Ziwei's attainment of the Tao did not bring such a great shock to everyone. Under this kind of shock, because of the North Star Emperor's attainment of the Tao, the bottleneck that restricted them from breaking through the primordial chaos Daluo Jinxian began to loosen. They did not have the time to check. Everything was because the one who attained the Tao was the North Star Emperor. The young man from the human race was from the Zichin clan. He was different from the great Emperor Ziwei. The great Emperor Ziwei had a strong background and was almost unparalleled in the primordial world. He was a great god born from the Ziwei star and was from the same sect as the heavenly Tao. He was known as the god of Pangu and was the purest Pangu. Such a person was destined to attain the Tao. No matter how great his achievements were, it would not surprise anyone. At most, they would sigh and say, "The legacy of the Pangu is so terrifying." On the contrary, it would be surprising if such a person could not attain the Tao. Therefore, even if the great Emperor Ziwei only used less than 10 million years to attain the Tao, no one would be too surprised. Moreover, from the fact that the great Emperor Ziwei and the North Star Emperor were on good terms, it could be seen that the great Emperor Ziwei had already existed countless years ago. It was just that he did not show up because of the threat of Dijun. Being born during the great calamity of the world was just a trick to deceive people, who knew how many years he had hidden in the dark to cultivate. Therefore, using less than 10 million years to reach the Tao was something that could only deceive some ignorant existences. None of the truly powerful existences would believe such a thing. However, the North Star Emperor was different. He was a great existence that had really grown up under their noses. It had only been more than 10 million years since the birth of the human race. As the leader of the 10 generations of the human race, Feng Zichen, from the moment he embarked on the path of cultivation, it had been less than 10 million years. However, in such a short period of time, not only had he surpassed them, but he had also attained the Tao before them. He had left them far behind and even surpassed them by a large margin. Compared to him, they could be said to have lived for hundreds of millions of years in vain. Moreover, the most unacceptable thing for the great divine masters of the primordial world was Feng Zichen's background. If Feng Zichen was the reincarnation of a chaos fiend god or some other creature with a profound background, then everyone would be able to accept his current achievements. However, Feng Zichen was a postnatal life form. Even if he was the first postnatal life form in the primordial world, he was still a postnatal life form. In the Khanate era, he was far inferior to a Khanate life form, let alone a Khanate god fiend or Khanate saint. A creature that was incomparably humble in their eyes, even inferior to an ant, had achieved more dazzling achievements than them in a short period of time. In front of Feng Zichen, the great divine masters, who had always thought that they were not weaker than others, felt that they were inferior to him for the first time. The huge difference made it difficult for the great divine masters, who were used to being high and mighty, to adapt. That sense of unwillingness deeply pierced their self-esteem, making it difficult for them to accept the truth in front of them. However, they had to accept it even if they couldn't. As the North Star Emperor withdrew his aura, the heaven and earth phenomenon also ended. The majesty that suppressed the heavens and the earth also disappeared in an instant, and all of this symbolized that the North Star Emperor had stabilized his realm. Sai, don't be conflicted. The North Star Emperor's attainment of the Tao is his own and also his opportunity. There's nothing to be envious of. Moreover, his attainment of the Tao is also a good thing for us. The poor Wei feels that with the North Star Emperor's attainment of the Tao, the boundary between the quasi-sage realm and the primordial chaos Daluo Jinxian realm is becoming more and more blurred. Perhaps it won't be long before we can attain the Tao. After all, they had seen too many storms. After losing their composure for a short while, everyone quickly stabilized their Tao hearts and improved a little, making their hearts to pursue the Tao even more determined. Then, everyone put away their complicated emotions and flew towards the boundless starry sky with a calm attitude to congratulate the North Star Emperor's attainment of the Tao. Just as everyone moved, the North Star Emperor and the South Pole Emperor moved at the same time. The difference was that one was walking towards the boundless starry sky, while the other was heading towards the boundless starry sky. At the same time, in the primordial world, changes occurred again. With the North Star Emperor's attainment of the Tao, the fate of the human race gradually disappeared, and the river of fate also disappeared. Without the suppression of the two, the aura that belonged to the human race was no longer concealed and was exposed to the heavenly way. In the human race's territory, 36 auras that belonged to the Daluo Jinxian and tens of thousands of auras that belonged to the Tai Jinxian burst out without any reservation. Rumble. The terrifying aura rose from the human race's territory and rushed to the sky, stirring up the boundless wind and clouds. Even the heavenly court was shaken by the aura. One could see how powerful it was. Good heavens! With such a powerful force, it could be said to be comparable to a quasi-sage expert, let alone surpassing the golden immortal realm. The human race's action was no less than challenging the heavenly way. Rumble. In the blink of an eye, the moment the human race's aura was exposed, the sea of laws at the intersection of heaven and earth shook violently as if it was enraged. Boundless laws swept out as if they were going to suppress everything. Clatter. The sound of chains rattling could be heard from the void. Then, in the sea of laws, streaks of divine light descended and turned into divine chains of order that charged toward the human race. Swish, 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 before the human experts could react. The divine chains of order formed by the divine light had already crossed the boundless void and arrived in the human race's territory. They wrapped around the human experts' bodies and locked them firmly. Then, streaks of divine light flashed. The human experts who were entangled by the divine light had disappeared without a trace. They had been led to the heavenly realm. Not long after, more than half of the human experts had disappeared. However, while some people were slow to react, there were naturally others who reacted quickly. As soon as the river of fate disappeared, some people realized that something was wrong. Almost instinctively, they rushed into the heavenly palace. Thus, under the protection of the heavenly palace, these human experts were not sensed by the divine light and were spared. Even so, more than 80% of the human experts were still forced to ascend to the heavenly realm. After this incident, the human race's strength in the primordial world could be said to have suffered a great loss. When they were forcefully received by the divine light, their bodies were branded with the heavenly Tao. With this Tao imprint, even if their strength was suppressed, they would not be able to return to the primordial world in a short period of time. This was because, with the heavenly Tao imprint on their bodies, they would definitely be rejected by the primordial world. They could only return to the primordial world after the heavenly Tao aura disappeared. There was another important point. The heavenly Tao aura on the imprint would disappear, but the imprint itself would not disappear. The imprints could be stacked. The more imprints one had, the harder it would be to get close to the primordial world. At the same time, when the imprints accumulated to a certain number, it would attract a heavenly tribulation or even a heavenly punishment. This was a method used by the heavenly Tao to counter cultivators. It was to prevent cultivators from frequently exposing their strength in the primordial world. If they wanted to erupt once and leave, they could come back later. That was impossible. The loopholes of the heavenly Tao were not so easy to exploit. Those who dared to exploit the loopholes of the heavenly Tao would definitely pay the price. This was because the heavenly Tao would not reason with you at all. If they found a loophole, they would fill it. As for those who took advantage of the loopholes, they would kill them casually. Therefore, even if there was a passage to the heavenly realm in the heavenly palace, the human experts who were guided away by the divine light could not return through these passages. At least, that was the case for a short period of time. However, they did not have to return. This was because the primordial world would welcome the 6 celestial emperors of the human race, the North Star Emperor. As everyone knew, the true identity of the North Star Emperor was the ancient sacred emperor of the human race, the Zichin clan. Since he would be the celestial emperor, these human experts who had just ascended to the heavenly realm would naturally have the opportunity to show their prowess. Of course, even if the human race on the ground had lost 80% of their strength, they still had the power to suppress the entire primordial world. This was not an exaggeration. The current human race was more than 10 times stronger than before. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was 100 times or 1,000 times stronger. With such strength, even if they had lost 80% of their strength, they were still stronger than before. Since that was the case, it did not make sense that the weak human race in the past could suppress the primordial world. But now the stronger human race could not do so? Good. Very good. The current human race finally has a trace of the shadow of the primordial world's great race. In the chaos outside the heavens, Feng Zichin sensed the changes in the human race, and he could not help but feel happy. Of course, he dared to show such a performance because he was not afraid that the three Pure Ones and the others would discover his relationship with the human race. That was because the North Star Emperor had achieved the Tao. As a good friend of the North Star Emperor, he would naturally be very happy to see his good friend achieve the Tao. On this point, no one could find fault with it. Unlike Feng Zichen's joy, the three Pure Ones' faces were completely dark. As for Zhu Ti and the other two, they were watching from the side. This time, the human race had prospered. Because of the Khanate ferocious beasts, the chaos of the demon sect, and the disaster of the chaos fiend god, most of the three Pure Ones' plans had failed, especially the Heavenly Lord of primordial beginning. It could be said that he had suffered a great loss. No, it should be said that he had lost everything. Although the Grand Pure One and the Grand Master of Heaven had suffered some losses, they had each obtained the position of the Imperial Preceptor. As for the Heavenly Lord of primordial beginning, not only did they not get anything, but they also lost a lot. Back in the Purple Cloud Palace, everyone had already agreed to give the position of the Imperial Preceptor to the three sections. Chapter 663. As for why it was 3 sects and not 4, that was naturally because everyone followed the usual practice and excluded the Western sect, the matter in the East. How could he allow the Western barbarians to interfere? After the 3 sects obtained the position of the teacher of the 3 emperors, the Grand Pure One personally descended to the mortal world to teach the emperor of the human race, Fuxi. Although the identity of the emperor was noble, the Grand Pure One was the heavenly Tao Saint. He was the spokesperson of the heavenly Tao in the primordial world. With such a status, he was definitely qualified to become the Sky Emperor's master. After Heavenly Emperor Fuxi, it was Earthly Emperor Shenong. However, at that moment, in order to protect the primordial world, all the saints had left the primordial world and headed to the chaos outside the heavens. Since the prime of Tongtian was not around, Xianqing took the Earthly Emperor as his disciple. Although the Earthly Sovereign status was much higher than Xianqing's, the Earthly Sovereign status was much higher. Moreover, Xianqing was far from being comparable to the Grand Pure One. But, in the end, the Earthly Sovereign was also a human. On the other hand, Xianqing was the immortal master of the human race. He was the teacher of all the immortals of the human race and was worshipped by the entire human race. Therefore, as long as the Emperor of Earth was still a human, he would have to call Xianqing teacher. With this identity, Xianqing was naturally qualified to be the teacher of the Earthly Sovereign. Rin's school had the Grand Pure One, and Jia School had the 9 Heavens Immortal Venerables. However, Chan's school had nothing. Although the 12 Golden Immortals all had extraordinary backgrounds, their achievements were extremely limited. He hadn't even touched the threshold of Daluo Jingxian, let alone become the teacher of Renhuang. Furthermore, due to Fuxi and Shenong's exceedingly outstanding performance, the position of the Renhuang changed. He went from the ruler of a race to the ruler of all races. Therefore, the Renhuang became even more honorable. In that case, with the cultivation of the 12 Golden Immortals of the Chan School, who were not as strong as Daluo Jingxian, how could they be qualified to be the human emperor's teacher? Wasn't he afraid of being devoured by the qi of heaven and earth and falling into the cycle of reincarnation? He knew that he was not qualified. Even if the disciples of Chan School were unwilling, they had no choice but to change. He changed his plan from becoming the teacher of the human emperor to helping the human emperor unify the primordial world. In this way, although the merit points obtained would be less, at least he would not return empty-handed. After all, no matter what, this was an opportunity that the 3 pristine ones fought so hard for. They cannot waste it. If he could get a little more, he would get a little more. Unfortunately, the 12 Golden Immortals of Chan School had a good idea, but they had overestimated their strength. In the battle between Xian Yuan and Qi Yu, not only did they not gain any benefits, but they were also caught in the tribulation. If Taoist Randang had not taken action in time, they would have died in the tribulation and turned into ashes. After a great battle, not only did he not reap any benefits, he almost lost his disciple. How could the primordial Lord of Heaven not be angry? And this was not what angered him the most. What infuriated him the most was that because of the tribulation aura, the disciples of the Chan school had to go through the tribulation in the future to erase the tribulation aura on their bodies. Otherwise, he would have to go through the cycle of reincarnation. It was already good enough that the Heavenly Lord of Primordial Beginning did not fly into a rage on the spot when such a great opportunity was ruined. In short, the matter of the Imperial Tutor. The primeval Lord of Heaven had suffered a great loss. After the 3 sovereigns were the 5 emperors. Since the 3 imperial tutors belonged to the 3 pure ones, then the imperial tutors of the 5 emperors belonged to them as well. However, the 3 sovereigns were too strong. With the strength of the 3 of them, they stirred up the boundless momentum and forcefully raised the position of the human emperor, causing the position of the 5 emperors to change. Once they succeeded to the throne, they would be the master of all races. With such an identity, the remaining disciples of the 3 sects were not qualified to be their teachers. If they forced it, they would only end up being devoured by luck. Just like that, the 3 pure ones' plan for the human race was broken in an unexpected way. The failure of the imperial tutor's plan undoubtedly had a huge impact on the 3 pure ones, because this caused their subsequent plans for the human race to be unable to be carried out. The reason why the 3 pure ones valued the position of the imperial tutor so much was not because of the merit. How much merit was there? How could it move the 3 pure ones, who had the merit of opening the heavens? What really moved them was the destiny of the human race. After grasping the position of the imperial tutor, they could use this as a foundation to slowly erode the destiny of the human race. Without the position of the imperial tutor, the 3 pure ones would lose a method to erode the destiny of the human race. In this way, how could their faces not turn black? As for receiving Zhuan-Ti, no matter how high the destiny of the human race was, it would have nothing to do with them. No, it was not completely unrelated. After all, there was an irreconcilable blood feud between the 2. If the destiny of the human race was too strong, it would not be a good thing for receiving Zhuan-Ti. In the future, he still needed to find an opportunity to weaken the strength of the human race. Otherwise, if the human race was too strong, they would attack the Western sect instead. In the chaos outside the sky, unlike the 3 pure ones' gloomy expressions, the joy on Yua's face was almost undisguised. She was too happy. No matter how much she fantasized, she would never have thought that the postnatal race that was created to achieve the Tao. Today, she had achieved something that even the Magi and demons had not done at their peak and become the main character of the primordial world. That was the main character of the world, a powerful race that controlled half of the destiny of the primordial world. Although the destiny of the human race was not completely controlled by Nuwa, as the creator of the human race, as long as the human race was not destroyed, she would always control a portion of the destiny of the human race. This was a unique benefit of the creator of the human race. Others could not envy it. This portion of destiny was between 10% and 20%. The remaining destiny of the human race was more complicated. Because of the immortal Tao, the celestial sect of wonders controlled 20% to 30% of the destiny of the human race. The immortal Tao was the foundation of the celestial sect of wonders. Later on, it expanded into the Tao of alchemy, the Tao of refining, and several other cultivation paths. As long as there were people in the human race who cultivated these great Taos, a portion of the destiny of the human race would definitely flow into the celestial sect of wonders. This was something that could not be helped. To be honest, the reason why the celestial sect of wonders could dominate the primordial world was that the immortal Tao had become the mainstream of the primordial world's cultivation. The immortal Tao was the foundation of the celestial sect of wonders. In a sense, Anyone who cultivated the immortal Tao was a member of the Celestial Sect of Wonders. The power of the Celestial Sect of Wonders could be seen from this. The destiny of the human race that belonged to the Celestial Sect of Wonders was not unique to the three pure ones, but shared by the disciples of the Celestial Sect of Wonders. However, the three pure ones made up the majority, about 90% of them. After the Celestial Sect of Wonders, the Heavenly Court also controlled a portion of the human race's destiny, but it was not much. The Heavenly Court, as the ruler of the primordial world. His destiny was not born out of thin air. When the Heavenly Court was formed, all existences in the primordial world, regardless of whether it was a person or an object, as long as they were in the primordial world, they had to part a wisp of destiny and gather in the center of the primordial world. And this was the destiny of the Heavenly Court, and it was also the symbol of the Heavenly Court's control of the primordial world. As a member of the primordial world, the human race naturally had a wisp of destiny in the Heavenly Court. If the Heavenly Court had it, so did the Een Court. After all, countless people died every year in the human race. After deducting the destiny in the hands of outsiders, the destiny that the human race truly controlled was only about 50%. This was already quite a lot. In addition to the destiny in Nua's hands, it was already almost 70%. This 50% of the destiny that belonged to the human race belonged to the human race, and it was not in the hands of a single person. However, although this portion of destiny was shared, it was not something that anyone could use. Without a doubt, Feng Zichen had the highest priority in the use of this portion of providence. After that, it was the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors. After that, it was those with high authority in the human race. Don't underestimate this 50% of the human race's destiny. One had to know that the destiny of the human race was as much as half of the primordial world's destiny. Its strength had reached an unbelievable level. Even a saint would not dare to say that he could contend with it. Even if it was only 50%, if it could be completely concentrated on a single person, it could create an existence that was comparable to a saint out of thin air. However, it was a pity that unless it was a last resort, the destiny of the human race would not all gather on a single person. After all, the destiny of the human race was not all on a single person. 50% of the destiny is not much, but it is not little either. However, for the human race, it is already the bottom line. It can't be less. If it is less than 50%, the human race will be in danger of losing its dominance. In the chaos outside the sky, Feng Zichen thought to himself, the human race only controlled 50% of the destiny. This was an extremely dangerous signal for him. One had to know that destiny was not unchanging. If someone controlled more than 50% of the destiny of the human race, then if this person wanted to do something to the human race, Feng Zichen would not be able to stop him at all. Therefore, 50% of the destiny was Feng Zichen's bottom line. However, this was far from enough. He still needed more. Only when more of the destiny of the human race was in the hands of the human race could the human race truly control their own destiny and not become someone else's puppet. 50% of the destiny of the human race outside, other than the 10% of the destiny of the Nua that could not be changed, the rest of the destiny was Feng Zichen's goal. Destiny was not unchanging. External factors had a great impact on it. If the immortal path's influence in the human race was weak, then, correspondingly, the destiny of the human race that it controlled would be reduced. At present, Feng Zichen's primary goal was to suppress the immortal path and weaken the influence of the 3 pure ones on the human race. And on this point, the North Star Emperor was already planning. Looking from the chaos outside the sky back to the primitive land. At this moment, with Emperor Shun's abdication, everyone elected you as the leader of the human race to rule the primitive land. However, due to the end of the Emperor's destiny of the human race, you was only respected as King Yu, not Emperor Yu. However, even though the Emperor's destiny of the human race had ended, the emperor's aura of the human race did not weaken at all. It still existed in the form of a 9-clawed divine dragon, hovering above the ancestral land of the human race, emitting endless majesty that deterred all races. Perhaps, with the support of such a strong emperor's aura, it would produce an emperor's purple aura for the human race. It was not impossible for King Yu to take another step forward and become one of the 9 great emperors of the human race. What a strong emperor's aura! Perhaps this is where Yu's opportunity lies. With this, he can take another step forward and become a great emperor. If this is really the case, the destiny of the human race will definitely be stronger. In the heaven, the North Star Emperor could not help but exclaim when he saw the scene in the ancestral land of the human race. Such a strong emperor's aura could be said to be the foundation of becoming an emperor. As long as the human race could develop steadily in the coming days without any major issues, the matter of Yu becoming the Mother * King, human king, was basically set in stone. However, things would obviously not go so smoothly. That was because Heaven's Way had decided for the human race to prosper, and there were only 8 great emperors, the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors. The extra one was obviously not within Heaven's Way's plan. This was going against Heaven's Way. There would definitely be countless tribulations accompanying it to cut off the possibility of the 9th great emperor appearing in the human race. The peace in the primitive land would not be maintained for long. That was because Heaven's Way had not noticed the signs of King Yu becoming an emperor. Therefore, the primitive land could continue to maintain its peace. However, once Heaven's Way noticed that something was wrong, endless tribulations would definitely follow and descend upon the primitive land to destroy King Yu's foundation of becoming an emperor. Heaven's Way! Then let's have a fight and see whose methods are better. Emperor Gaochen thought silently as he thought about the possible tribulations in the future. He had already expected the tribulations that King Yu would face when he became an emperor. After all, the birth of a great emperor was never simple. The birth of every great emperor would be accompanied by endless blood and fire. Feng Zichen was not afraid of going against Heaven's Way. That was because he was very familiar with going against Heaven's Way. After all, he had done it many times. That's right, the current North Star Emperor was already a heavenly emperor. Not long after he attained Tao, the great emperor of the South Pole gave him the position of heavenly emperor. Emperor Yu's matter is not urgent. The most important thing now is the immortal Tao. After putting Yu's matter aside, Gaochen could not help but feel a headache when he thought about the immortal Tao in the primitive land and the decline of the Tao of God-fiends. As the postnatal era completely descended, what Feng Zichen was worried about finally happened. The Tao of God-fiends gradually declined, and the immortal Tao that was suppressed by it gradually recovered. Regarding this, Feng Zichen was also helpless. The cultivation of the Tao of God-fiends really consumed too many resources. The current environment could not support the cultivation of this Tao at all. There was no possibility of taking another step forward. Who would be foolish enough to persist? Therefore, the decline of the Tao of God-fiends was inevitable. It was not because the Tao of God-fiends was too weak. On the contrary, it was because it was too strong that it attracted the jealousy of the heavens and limited its development. In the future, the Tao of God-fiends would probably become the private land of prodigies. Not all prodigies cultivated the Tao of God-fiends, but those who cultivated the Tao of God-fiends were definitely prodigies. Ordinary people could not even enter the door. Regarding this, Feng Zichen was naturally unwilling, but he had no choice. The more powerful something was, the more restricted it would be. Moreover, the Tao of God-fiends was an existence that could allow one to go against the heavens. This was simply heaven-defying. The heavenly Tao allowed the Tao of God-fiends to develop for nearly 10 million years without making a move. It was already giving Feng Zichen enough face. Chapter 664. Sigh. The times have changed. If the Tao of the God Fiend cannot be changed, it is inevitable that it will be abandoned by the times. Forget it. Since I have nothing to do recently, I might as well spend more effort on the Tao of the God Fiend to simplify it and make it like the immortal Tao, suitable for the general public. With that thought, Feng Zichen made a decision in his heart to modify the Tao of the God Fiend. If the threshold of cultivation was too high, it was definitely not a good thing for a Tao path, especially one that was preparing to prosper in the world. If the threshold was too high, it was equivalent to rejecting the majority of living beings. However, if that was the case, what was the use of being able to produce world-shaking experts? If there were too few people, they would not be able to support a Tao, not to mention competing with other orthodoxies for the providence of heaven and earth. The longevity of a Tao path had nothing to do with whether it was the strongest or not. It had to do with whether it was the most suitable for all living beings. Compared to the Tao of the God Fiend, the immortal Tao was indeed weaker. However, its threshold was extremely low, and almost everyone could get started. And this was the advantage of the immortal Tao. In this world, there might be times when there were no prodigies born. However, there would never be a lack of ordinary people. The weakness of the Tao of the God Fiend was that it relied too much on prodigies. If there were no prodigies born in several generations, wouldn't the Tao of the God Fiend be cut off? Therefore, Feng Zichen thought of modifying the Tao of the God Fiend. To compete with the immortal Tao, the first thing the Tao of the God Fiend had to do was to lower the threshold. Otherwise, there was no need to compete. The Tao of the God Fiend had already lost from the beginning. Just like that, Feng Zichen was immersed in modifying the Tao of the God Fiend. Just like that, time passed by unknowingly. In the blink of an eye, 10,000 years had passed. Rumble. On this day, the heavenly court, which had not moved for a long time, suddenly emitted a huge fluctuation. A huge phantom of a stone tablet loomed in the sky above the heavenly realm. In an instant, a terrifying aura spread throughout the entire primordial world in the blink of an eye. It was like a mountain pressing down on the hearts of all living beings. What happened? Such a commotion naturally alarmed the great beings, who were cultivating diligently. Thus, they all raised their heads and looked at the place where the aura erupted. A terrifying gaze shot out from the eyes of the great magics, piercing through the layers of void. Soon, it arrived above the celestial court. As far as the eye could see, there was a huge stone tablet standing between heaven and earth, emitting endless majesty. The body of the stone tablet was engraved with mysterious runes, as though they recorded the most noble truth of the world. Endless Taoist rhymes swirled around them, making them look exceptionally mysterious. When facing such a profound stone tablet, if an ordinary person were to take a single glance at it, the person would probably be unable to help but be immersed in it and disregard everything to comprehend the grand Tao profundities within it. However, the great masters from the celestial sect of wonders were different. The moment they saw the mysterious characters on the stone tablet, a strong desire to destroy appeared in their hearts without any warning, urging them to destroy the stone tablet. It was as if the existence of the stone tablet could shake the foundation of their existence, giving them an extremely dangerous feeling. It was this feeling that made them want to destroy the stone tablet, and they couldn't get rid of it. Almost instinctively, the great masters from the celestial sect of wonders unconsciously raised their palms and were about to blast a magical ability at the stone tablet. However, at this moment, a loud roar suddenly sounded between heaven and earth. It was like thunder exploding in everyone's ears, waking them up. Then, endless golden light descended from the sky and surged crazily toward the stone tablet. That was the golden light of merit. What is the origin of that stone tablet? Why did the poor Wei have the idea of destroying it just by looking at it? At this moment, the great masters of the celestial sect of wonders who had regained their senses looked at the stone tablet with bewilderment. They had no idea why such a situation had happened. If these great masters were only panicking, then the one in the purple cloud palace was already so shocked that he was speechless. The moment the stone tablet appeared, Tao Ancestor Hongjun, who was comprehending the heavenly Tao in the purple cloud palace, suddenly felt a wave of palpitations and directly withdrew from his enlightenment. Then, before he could understand the situation, he saw the destiny of the celestial sect of wonders shake violently as if it had met a mortal enemy. Under this power, even the purple cloud palace, which was as powerful as it was, could not stop shaking. Rumble! The entire purple cloud palace was shaking. The terrifying Tao rune spread and set off huge waves in the chaos outside the heavens. This sudden scene caused even Tao Ancestor Hong Jun's powerful state of mind to be unable to help but cause waves and ripples. Ever since the celestial sect of wonders established the primordial world after the war between Taoists and demons, the destiny of the celestial sect of wonders had been unparalleled. It firmly controlled the general trend of the primordial world, suppressing all the major forces until they could not raise their heads. No one could compete with it. It could be said that the celestial sect of wonders was the pillar of the primordial world. Naturally, no one could shake such a powerful existence's destiny. But today, the destiny of the celestial sect of wonders was shaking violently out of the ordinary, as if it had met a mortal enemy. How could Tao Ancestor Hong Jun not be shocked? This kind of situation had only happened in the primordial era when the demon sect was at its peak. Therefore, Tao Ancestor Hong Jun's first thought was that the demon sect had been revived again, but immediately he felt that something was amiss. Under the joint suppression of the 4 emperors of the heavenly court, the demon sect had been crippled. Even the demon ancestor Rao had been severely injured and would not be able to rise again in a short period of time. Therefore, the threat to the celestial sect of wonders was definitely not the demon sect. If it was not the demon sect, who else could it be? The celestial sect of wonders' destiny was clearly shaking the foundation of the celestial sect of wonders. And what was the foundation of the celestial sect of wonders? Naturally, it was the immortal Tao. An existence that threatens the immortal Tao? While feeling puzzled, Tao Ancestor Hong Jun could not help but calculate in his heart. In a trance, he first saw the figure of the North Star. Then he saw a huge stone tablet appear in his hand. It was extremely powerful, shattering endless time and space. It suddenly came to the long river of destiny and pressed down on the celestial sect of wonders' destiny, erupting with an intense battle. Martial Tao! It's the North Star! Shocked, Tao Ancestor Hong Jun withdrew from his deduction, but he had already understood the cause and effect. Martial Tao, an existence on par with the immortal Tao? North Star, is this the trump card you left for the human race? It's indeed an incredible achievement. However, if you want to rely on this to deal with the immortal Tao, you're underestimating the poor way and the celestial sect of wonders. The celestial sect of wonders was able to stand at the peak of the eldritch world for countless years, not only because of the advantage of the immortal Tao, but also because of the accumulation of the immortal Tao cultivators who occupied almost 90% of the eldritch world's living beings. In the face of such a powerful force, how can a newly born martial Tao compete with the immortal Tao? After understanding everything, Tao Ancestor Hong Jun only sneered coldly, and then he once again fell into a state of enlightenment. Even though he knew about the existence of martial Tao, he had no intention of doing anything to it. Firstly, martial Tao had just been born, and it was naturally protected by the heavens and earth. With the support of endless merit, others could not destroy it. Secondly, there was no need to. Yes, there was no need. Just as Tao Ancestor Hong Jun had said earlier, martial Tao had just been born and did not have the capital to compete with the immortal Tao. Did they really think that the power that the immortal Tao had accumulated over countless years was a joke? It could be said that as time passed, the immortal Tao had long penetrated into every corner of the world and became an indelible part of it. In the Eldritch world, almost 90% of the living beings had chosen to cultivate the immortal Tao. This power, just thinking about it, was terrifying. Back then, the reason why the demonic Tao could compete with the immortal Tao was only because everyone was on the same starting line. And now the celestial sect of wonders had long reached the end. But the martial Tao had just started from the beginning. With such a huge gap, how could the two compete? There was no comparison at all. If the immortal Tao was surpassed by the martial Tao under such circumstances, then it could only be said that the experts of the celestial sect of wonders were worse than pigs. They might as well all die of stupidity. In short, regarding the competition with the martial Tao, ancestor Hongjun could not be considered to have interfered. He had already merged the Tao and become a part of the heavenly Tao. Although the luck of the celestial sect of wonders was not something dispensable to him, it was not of much use. Moreover, anything that was beneficial to the Eldritch world, even if it hindered the development of the celestial sect of wonders, he would still support it. This was the price of merging the Tao. He had no choice. Not to mention, right now, the most important thing for Tao ancestor Hongjun was to pursue the realm of the Wuji Daluo Jinxian. Some mundane matters should not affect him. However, even so, Tao ancestor Hongjun did not do nothing. Just as he was cultivating in seclusion again, information about the martial Tao naturally appeared in the sea of consciousness of the second generation disciples of the celestial sect of wonders. After all, it was the great Tao that he had created himself. Tao ancestor Hongjun had some selfish motives. Very good. In a hall somewhere in the heavenly court, Feng Zichen looked at the stone tablet floating in the air in front of him and could not help but nod his head in satisfaction. This stone tablet was called the Heavenly Tablet of Martial Tao. The mysterious runes recorded on the tablet were the general outline of martial Tao, and without a doubt the so-called martial Tao was a simplified version of the path of gods and demons. Compared to the path of gods and demons, the martial Tao was undoubtedly much weaker. Not only was its combat strength far inferior, but even its ability to go against the innate heavens was also removed. This formed the martial Tao in front of him. However, although the martial Tao was weak, its threshold had dropped too much. It was even lower than the immortal Tao. Basically, anyone could enter the martial Tao. There was no aptitude requirement at all. There was just one thing that was not good. It was easy to enter the martial Tao, but difficult to achieve great success. If one wanted to achieve great success in the martial Tao, it was much more difficult than achieving great success in the immortal Tao. However, it did not matter. The martial Tao was not prepared for those with good talent. The meaning of the martial Tao was to facilitate those with insufficient aptitude to step onto the path of cultivation. Those with good talent did not need to cultivate the martial Tao. At the end of the martial Tao, there was still the path of gods and demons waiting for them. The end of the martial Tao was the beginning of the divine Tao. The end of the martial Tao here did not refer to the Tao. It was when the martial Tao foundation establishment reached an extremely perfect realm. There was no way to advance. In this way, one could break the shackles of the martial Tao and step into the domain of the path of gods and demons. It could be said that the martial Tao was the foundation of the path of gods and demons. The meaning of its existence, other than helping those with poor talent to step onto the path of cultivation, there was another purpose. That was to select talents for the path of gods and demons. Only those with the most outstanding performance when the martial Tao foundation establishment could step onto the path of gods and demons. Although the path of gods and demons and the martial Tao were two different great Taos, in fact, they were the same great Tao. The difference was one walked the elite path, the other walked the popular path. The path of gods and demons was Feng Zichen's painstaking effort. How could he give up so easily? Naturally, he had to think of a way to preserve it completely. Even if there was the martial Tao, he could not cut off the inheritance of the path of gods and demons. Therefore, he had just thought of this way to have the best of both worlds. Not only did he preserve the path of gods and demons, but he also derived a martial Tao that was more suitable for the human race. The heavenly steel of martial Tao Go. In the heavenly court, Feng Zichen raised his arm slightly and pointed out. Immediately, the heavenly steel of martial Tao shook. A wave of martial Tao True will soar into the sky and pierce through the 33 heavens. Then the heavenly steel of martial Tao broke through the void of the heavenly realm and directly passed through the sea of laws. With an incomparable aura, it crashed into the human race's ancestral temple. Rumble. At this moment, the destiny of the human race shook. Almost at the same time, the cultivation method of the martial path appeared in the minds of all the human race cultivators. In just an instant, martial Tao spread throughout the entire human race. The heavenly steel of martial Tao. It could be said that it was Feng Zichen's proud work. It was an object that preached the Tao, a divine ability and a magic treasure. It was said that it was an object that preached the Tao because it recorded the truth of the martial Tao. It was said that it was a divine ability because in order to carry the truth of the martial Tao, Feng Zichen had changed the supreme divine ability that he had created from comprehending Mount Buzhou, the Mount Buzhou seal, and used its immortal divine power to transform into the main body of the heavenly steel of martial Tao. It could be said that a heavenly steel of martial Tao was equivalent to a small Mount Buzhou, and it was Mount Buzhou that carried the true will of martial Tao. Its power could be imagined. As for calling it a magic treasure, it was because at the moment of the birth of the martial Tao, boundless merit fell from the heavens, and all fell into the heavenly steel of martial Tao. Even Feng Zichen's portion was injected into it. For this, with the help of merit, the heavenly steel of martial Tao was able to turn into reality. It became a top-notch postnatal merit supreme treasure. Moreover, the limit of the heavenly steel of martial Tao was not limited to this. As an object that preached the Tao, the heavenly steel of martial Tao carried the martial Tao. For this reason, it would definitely be worshipped by the human race in the future. In this way, the heavenly steel of martial Tao would not lack incense and willpower in the future. Unlike humans, magic treasures did not have spiritual intelligence, so they did not have to worry about the hidden dangers in the incense and willpower. Therefore, with the support of the incense and willpower, even if the heavenly steel of martial Tao could not transform into a primordial treasure, however, its power would also become stronger and stronger. Sooner or later, it would reach the level of a primordial treasure. In that case, the human race would have another primordial treasure, and these would be the human race's capital to fight against the celestial sect of wonders in the future. After the birth of martial Tao, the luck of the human race has increased a lot. However, none of this is important. What's important is that with the birth of martial Tao, the human race will have the capital to fight against the immortal path. We won't become the puppets of the celestial sect of wonders. Looking at the changes in the human race, Feng Zichen's face revealed an unfathomable expression. Of course, he could also think of what Tao ancestor Hongjun could think of. But what he thought was even further than Tao ancestor Hongjun. The times were always changing. Therefore, in the primordial world, there was no cultivation path that could guarantee that they could always adapt to the times and not be abandoned by the times because they were backward. Therefore, even if it was as strong as the immortal path, there would be a day when it would be abandoned by the times. And at that time, it would be the opportunity for the martial Tao. Chapter 665. If Feng Zichen remembered correctly, in the near future, due to the further deterioration of the world's environment, the immortal path that everyone could cultivate would gradually become unsuitable for everyone. There would always be a portion of people who could not enter because of their poor aptitude, and this group of people would increase as time passed. This kind of situation was inevitable in the development of the era. Even the powerful immortal path could not avoid it, but martial arts would not. The extremely low threshold made it almost impossible for martial arts to be affected by the external environment, unless the world completely entered an era of no return. Otherwise, even in the age of chaos, martial arts would still have room to survive. And this was an advantage that the immortal path did not have, and also the hope of martial arts surpassing the immortal path. Martial arts had a lot of potential. Of course, all of this was Feng Zichen's imagination. The changes in the future were just a possibility for martial arts to surpass the immortal path, but whether or not it could really achieve this would depend on Feng Zichen's methods. After all, the Xian sect was not to be trifled with. They would not watch martial arts surpass the immortal path. Moreover, the world's environment could not continue to be bad. This was because with the formation of the god Pango, the primeval world had the possibility of taking a step closer. In theory, the innate spirit qi should be getting denser and denser. The current situation in the primeval world was the result of the deliberate suppression of the heavenly Tao. However, there was a limit to everything. Even the powerful heavenly Tao could not always suppress the primeval world. When it reached the limit, the harder it was suppressed now, the stronger it would rebound in the future. Perhaps it would return to the ancient primeval age in one fell swoop, or even surpass it. However, that was another story, the story of the recovery of spirit qi. To be honest, Feng Zichen was looking forward to the day of the recovery of spirit qi, because that was the most suitable era for the path of gods and demons. After the recovery of spirit qi, the ancient bloodline that had been suppressed by the environment for countless years began to slowly recover in the bodies of all living beings. If at this time all living beings with awakened bloodlines cultivated the path of gods and demons, combined with their ability to go against the innate heavens, wouldn't they have the potential to soar into the sky? This was an advantage that the other grand Daos did not have. It could be said that this environment was tailor-made for the Tao of fiend gods. With the momentum in his body, his god-fiend Tao soared, suppressing all other great Daos. Therefore, Feng Zichen was looking forward to that day. Of course, this was all in the future. It was also a backup plan that Feng Zichen had deliberately left behind. If in the future martial arts really lost to the immortal path, then the rise of the Tao of gods and demons would be Feng Zichen's last resort to deal with the immortal path. However, according to his original intention, he still did not think that the martial path would lose to the immortal path. Martial arts, a future enemy of the immortal Tao. Seeing the message that suddenly appeared in their minds, the people of the celestial sect of wonders were puzzled at first. Then they suddenly became alert. There were also many people whose eyes were emitting shocking, killing intent. According to their thoughts, anything that could threaten the immortal path should not exist. The immortal Tao was too important to them. It could be said that their achievements today were not only due to their own efforts, but also the help of the immortal Tao. Without the immortal Tao, they would not have been able to step into the realm of sage-to-be so quickly. Perhaps they would have been in the realm of Daluo Jinxian for countless years before they could see the hope of breaking through. It was the appearance of the immortal Tao that allowed them to see the path after Daluo Jinxian. They did not know when it started, but the relationship between these great beings and the immortal Tao had long become inseparable. They were the ancestors of the immortal Tao, the objects of worship of countless immortal Tao cultivators in the world, and they had the karmic position of heaven and earth. If the immortal Tao fell, these halos would fade from the people of the celestial sect of wonders. The various blessings that came with it would also disappear. In this case, how could they tolerate it? Emperor Gaochen, is it? I didn't expect that in a moment of carelessness, this person would become a great threat to the immortal Tao. After learning the news of martial arts, For a moment, everyone was extremely disgusted with Feng Zichen, the creator of martial arts. It was this person. He had shaken their interests. He really deserved to die. Thinking of this, everyone could not help but have the intention to kill Feng Zichen in their hearts. Whoosh! With the ability of the great beings, once their intention to kill was raised, heaven and earth would immediately respond. Endless blood clouds appeared, as if covering the sky and the sun, shrouding the entire vault of heaven. At the same time, a murderous aura suddenly came from heaven and earth. It was cold and penetrating, and the temperature of the entire eldritch land could not help but drop a few degrees. Even the living beings of heaven and earth could not help but inexplicably shiver under this murderous aura, and great fear grew in their hearts. At this moment, an angry roar suddenly came from heaven and earth, carrying with it an unparalleled force, dispelling the haze that shrouded the hearts of all living beings. Impudent! An impudent voice came from above the celestial court, containing the fury of thunder, like the roar of the Tao, exploded in the eldritch land, and in one fell swoop, extinguishing the murderous aura of the great beings of the celestial sect of wonders. This was Feng Zichen's voice. The murderous aura of the great beings of the celestial sect of wonders could be felt by all living beings of heaven and earth, let alone Feng Zichen. It could be said that the crowd did not hide their murderous aura at all, and with an extremely arrogant attitude, they went straight to the celestial court. This was simply a provocation, and it showed that the crowd did not put Feng Zichen in their eyes at all. How could Feng Zichen tolerate such an arrogant attitude of the other party? Not to mention, he had just reached the realm of the primordial chaos Daluo Jinxian, and was looking for an opportunity to establish his power, but now someone had taken the initiative to come to his door. Almost without hesitation, he directly roared, with the unparalleled power of the primordial chaos, wanting to teach everyone a lesson. Humph! After the roar, everyone only felt that the dragon's roar was endless in their ears, oppressing their minds, and could not help but let out a muffled groan. "Ha! You want to kill me with such ability? It's simply an ant trying to shake a tree, overestimating your own strength." In the celestial court, Feng Zichen seemed to have noticed everyone's performance and could not help but mock them. This was a ruthless slap to the other party's face. As for keeping the peace, that was impossible. Ever since the birth of martial arts, no matter what kind of relationship he had with the celestial sect of wonders, he had now become a great enemy that would not rest until one of them was dead. The celestial sect of wonders. They absolutely could not tolerate him. Since that was the case, why should they show mercy? Naturally, they would seize the opportunity to humiliate the other party to death. Gao Qin knew when everyone heard that they were really embarrassed and angry. They were embarrassed because what the other party said was the truth. He was the primordial chaos Daluo Jinxian, and his strength was far beyond theirs. Moreover, he was the current celestial emperor. If they really fought, they would definitely not be a match for him. They were angry because the other party's words were too unpleasant. It was really infuriating. "Gao Qin, you've gone too far." Just as everyone was unable to get out of the embarrassing situation, a bolt of divine lightning suddenly flew from the chaos outside the heavens and blasted fiercely toward the celestial court. Tai, Qing divine lightning. Feng Zichen's pupils constricted slightly, but he recognized the origin of the divine lightning in front of him. It was the supreme divine lightning of the celestial sect of wonders, the Tai Qing divine lightning. The Grand Pure Saint had made his move. That made sense. As the eldest senior brother of the celestial sect of wonders, and also the acting sect master, how could he not make a move when such a big thing happened to the celestial sect of wonders? If he really sat and watched the group of celestial sect of wonders being wantonly humiliated by Feng Zichen without doing anything, then it could be said that the celestial sect of wonders' reputation had been completely lost. "How dare you, Grand Pure Saint? How dare you attack the celestial court? Even if you're a saint, you'll have to pay the price. The moment he saw the Tai Ching divine lightning, Feng Zichen's heart did not feel any fear. There was only endless anger in his heart. No matter what the Grand Pure Saint's reason was, if he dared to blast the Tai Ching divine lightning towards the celestial court, then he must pay the price. Because what was trampled on was not only Feng Zichen's dignity, but also the dignity of the entire celestial court. There was no dignity. How could the celestial court command the eldritch world? If Feng Zichen retreated at this moment, then the celestial court would have to bow down to the saints from now on. Absolutely not. The celestial court was the orthodox of the eldritch world, and also the most powerful force in the eldritch world. Kill. Divine steel of martial arts, suppress it for me. Furious, Feng Zichen activated the Mount Buzhou mark in his body. Combining the power of martial arts, it transformed into a gigantic steel that crashed towards the Tai Ching divine lightning. Martial arts supreme skill. Divine steel of martial arts. In an instant, the image of an ancient steel appeared from the void, exuding an enormous aura that could suppress all things, holding the Tai Ching divine lightning in place. The true meaning of martial arts in the divine steel of martial arts came from Mount Buzhou. If the Tai Ching divine lightning was in its peak state, it might be able to resist a little. However, crossing the endless chaos had already consumed too much of the Tai Ching divine lightning's power. As such, the current Tai Ching divine lightning was no match for the divine steel of martial arts. Boom! The divine steel of martial arts shook, and the image of Mount Buzhou appeared vaguely, exuding a monstrous aura that suppressed the surrounding space. One could see that the Tai Ching divine lightning was unable to resist this power as it kept shrinking. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a lightning pearl and fell into the celestial court. Boom! After that attack, the remaining power of the divine steel of martial arts did not dissipate. It broke through the endless void and charged towards the chaos beyond the heavens. Humph! Taoist Tai Ching, when you return from the chaos beyond the heavens, we will settle this karma. The North Star Emperor put away the lightning pearl formed by the Tai Ching divine lightning and snorted coldly. He did not charge towards the chaos beyond the heavens. At this critical moment for the human race, it was not appropriate for him to leave the eldritch world. Otherwise, he would not let today's matter go so easily. However, the Grand Pure One's attack this time had formed a huge karma with the celestial court. Whether it was the 4 heavenly deities or Haochen, they would have to fight with him in the future to settle this karma. The two of them were not fighting to determine the victor, but to express their attitude. Therefore, after that attack, the two of them stopped. This farce ended, and the eldritch world returned to peace. However, the eldritch world was calm, but the chaos beyond the heavens stirred again. With a boom, the chaos shattered, and a huge stone tablet suddenly appeared and blasted towards the Grand Pure One. How dare you! With a roar, the Grand Pure One waved the horsetail whisk in his hand and brushed it towards the divine steel of martial arts. Immediately, endless grand pure immortal light erupted, drowning and devouring the divine steel of martial arts. Old Grand Pure One, how dare you bully me like this? The moment the divine steel of martial arts shattered, Feng Zichen casually threw out 1,000 elephant divine lightning at the defenseless Grand Pure One. At the same time, his body swayed, and a huge Pengu Dao body appeared, charging towards the Grand Pure One. As one of the 4 heavenly deities, how could Feng Zichen, the great emperor of Ziwei, not react when he saw the Grand Pure One attack the celestial court? Rumble. Pengu's Dao body appeared. It was hundreds of millions of feet tall and was accompanied by boundless Dao runes. With every move he made, an unparalleled power erupted, shattering the surrounding primal chaos. This was called the extreme of strength. What? You, how can your physical body be so strong? I'm afraid even if Di Jiang comes back to life, he won't be so powerful. The appearance of Panga's Tao body, Feng Zichen version, for the first time brought a huge impact to the Grand Pure One. The vast and violent aura made his eyelids twitch, and he felt a sense of oppression. Oh no, this beast is too powerful. I can't fight it. The moment Feng Zichen pounced, the Grand Pure One did not hesitate to activate the Connate Cardinal Treasure, the Taiji painting, and evolve the Yin and Yang Qi to protect himself. Feng Zichen was unfazed by this and continued to throw a punch. He wanted to use the power of the Taiji painting to verify the power of his physical body. After the baptism of the great Tao, his physical body had undergone a shocking transformation. His strength had reached an unbelievable level. Strong, unimaginably strong. Although his Dharma powers and soul were also very strong, they were much weaker in front of his physical body. It could be said that Feng Zichen's physical body was his strongest technique at the moment. He could shatter the Tao with his bare hands. The power of a single attack could shatter the world. Boom! When Feng Zichen punched out, even the powerful Tai Chi diagram could not help but creak under the pressure. Then the Yin and Yang Qi that it had evolved shattered, revealing the Grand Pure One inside. Oh no! In his field of vision, a fist kept enlarging. The Grand Pure One did not have time to be shocked. He hurriedly took out the heaven-earth, mystic yellow merit pagoda and placed it above his head. Wisps of heaven and earth mystic yellow Qi hung down to block Feng Zichen's punch. With a bang, Feng Zichen's punch collided with the heaven-earth mystic yellow pagoda. Although it did not break through its defense, it sent him flying. Very good. In the distance, the Grand Pure One stood up in a slightly sorry state. His face was no longer as calm as before. There was only endless anger. Fellow Taoist Siwei, let the poor Wei experience your supreme method of suppressing the primordial world. As soon as he finished speaking, the Grand Pure One had the heaven-earth mystic yellow pagoda above his head. He held the Connate Cardinal Treasure, the Taiji painting, and charged towards Feng Zichen with a murderous expression. All right, I've long wanted to experience the methods of the leader of the saints. With a thought, Feng Zichen faced him with his bare hands. He could not use the Hongmeng Daozhong. The Zhouxing painting was no match for the Taiji painting. Since that was the case, he would use his physical body to resist the Taiji painting. Anyway, with the strength of his physical body, it was no weaker than a middle-grade Connate Cardinal Treasure. Boom! As soon as they fought, the disadvantage of Feng Zichen's insufficient realm was highlighted. He was almost suppressed by the Grand Pure One. However, the Grand Pure One could not hurt him. Chapter 666. Feng Zichen's physical body was too strong. No matter what mysterious techniques the Grand Pure One used, or what shocking mystical abilities he had. However, when it landed on Feng Zichen's body, it did not even cause a ripple. It had no effect at all. That was to say, the Tai Chi diagram, as the ultimate treasure of creation, was so powerful that it could block Feng Zichen's increasingly crazy attacks and even cause him harm. However, how astonishing was the recovery ability of Panga's Tao body. Feng Zichen had just been injured by the Taiji painting, but in the blink of an eye, his injuries would recover at an extremely fast speed as the qi and blood in his body flowed crazily. It was because of the amazing recovery ability of Panga's Tao body that Feng Zichen could fight with the Grand Pure One, who was at the sixth heaven of primordial chaos, with the power of the third heaven of primordial chaos. In fact, he slowly reversed the situation. After realizing that the Taiji painting could not cause fatal damage to him, Feng Zichen gave up on defense and launched the most ferocious attack on the Grand Pure One. It could be said that every move was a life-and-death attack. Under such a desperate attack, Feng Zichen gradually turned the situation around. From being suppressed by the Grand Pure One previously, he was completely suppressing the Grand Pure One. Boom! 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 After fighting with the Chaos Fiend God for countless years in the spiritual world, Feng Zichen's mystical abilities had long been polished to an extremely high realm. It could be said that it had gone deep into his bones and turned his mystical abilities into instincts. Every punch, every kick, even a strand of hair and a gaze were all incomparably powerful mystical abilities. With a thought, it was an explosion of energy waves that could destroy the world. Under Feng Zichen's attack, the chaos outside the sky boiled as if it could not withstand the power and was about to collapse. Even someone as strong as the Grand Pure One, who was known as the #1 saint, was forced to retreat. Even the heaven-earth mystic Yellow Pagoda, which was known to have the best defense in the postnatal realm, was dimmed. Clearly, it had been severely injured. At that moment, the Grand Pure One looked like a lone boat in the storm under Feng Zichen's attack. He was in danger of capsizing at any time. But in reality, that was not the case. Although Feng Zichen had suppressed the Grand Pure One the entire time and seemed to have the upper hand, he knew his own situation very well. This situation could not be maintained for long. Completely abandoning defense and turning it into the strongest offensive, this move of his had, of course, temporarily gained the upper hand. However, doing so would consume a lot of energy, and he wouldn't be able to maintain it for long. Furthermore, as a heaven-opening cardinal treasure, the Tai Chi diagram was far more mysterious than other connate cardinal treasures. Even among chaos spiritual treasures, it was one of the best. Not to mention anything else, just the 10% merit of creation in the heaven-splitting treasure was enough to make them stand at the top of all the treasures in the untainted land. What kind of concept was 10% of the merit of creation? The 3 pure ones became the saints of heaven because they each had 10% of the merit of creation. Each of the 3 heaven-opening cardinal treasures had 10% of the merit of creation. That was their invincible foundation in the primordial world. Facing such a powerful treasure, no matter how strong Feng Zichen's body was, it was only comparable to a middle-grade, connate cardinal treasure. How long could he last under the attack of the Tai Chi diagram? It could be said that the current situation where Feng Zichen had the upper hand was just an illusion that he had risked his life to maintain. Once his strength was exhausted or his body reached its limit and he could not continue to resist the Tai Chi diagram, that would be the beginning of his defeat. Feng Zichen knew that, and so did the Grand Pure One. Therefore, in the face of Feng Zichen's crazy attacks, the Grand Pure One did not choose to resist them head-on. Instead, he chose to defend. With his realm that surpassed Feng Zichen's 3rd firmament, it was enough for him to calmly block Feng Zichen's attacks. He was not very calm either. At the very least, he looked quite pathetic, but he did not suffer any injuries. Defense was the best way to deal with Feng Zichen at this moment. If he used the Tai Chi diagram to exhaust his chi and blood, wouldn't he be at his mercy when his chi and blood were exhausted? However, how could Feng Zichen let the Grand Pure One have his way? After fighting for so long, Feng Zichen was certain that unless he revealed his strength at the 5th firmament of primordial chaos, he would definitely not be a match for the Grand Pure One. However, it was not a life-and-death battle now. It was just a battle of emotions. It was not worth him revealing his trump card in advance. With that thought in mind, Feng Zichen decided to call a truce. He was not playing anymore. The moment he thought of it, Feng Zichen retreated and distanced himself from the Grand Pure One. Is this the strength of the leader of the saints? I've finally experienced it today. It's a little disappointing. After dispersing Panga's Tao body, Feng Zichen said to the Grand Pure One in an extremely disappointed tone. That expression, that posture, it was as if the words, "That's all there is to it," were plastered on his face. You, hearing that, even with the Grand Pure One's mental state, he could not help but be furious. What did he mean by SOO? He was clearly not his match but he still acted as if he had taken advantage of him. That attitude was really infuriating. If you're really strong enough, why don't you continue fighting? Didn't you see that the situation was not good and retreat in time? If they continued fighting, the Grand Pure One was definitely confident that he could suppress Feng Zichen. Unfortunately, at the critical moment, Feng Zichen retreated. That made the Grand Pure One very angry. Moreover, Feng Zichen had grasped the timing of his retreat very well. It happened to be the moment when he was exhausted and the Grand Pure One was about to counterattack. He was filled with anger and was about to counterattack so that he could vent his anger. However, at that moment, the other party retreated. He retreated, faced with such a situation. The Grand Pure One felt that there was nowhere to vent his anger. He could not help but feel aggrieved, especially once Feng Zichen left to create a false impression for others. When the Grand Pure One faced Great Emperor Zhui, he could not resist at all. He could only be beaten passively. Thinking of that, the Grand Pure One felt even more aggrieved. The Grand Pure One was furious. It had been a long time since he had the intention to kill Feng Zichen. Humph. You can fight whenever you want and stop whenever you want. How can there be such a good thing in the world? Fellow Taoist Ziwei, the poor Wei has yet to enjoy the battle just now. Why don't we have another battle? Although he said that the Grand Pure One did not give Feng Zichen any room to refuse. As he spoke, he had already raised the Taiji painting and attacked Feng Zichen. Rumble. The Grand Pure One attacked with hatred and almost used all his strength. In his hands, the power of the Taiji painting was completely restored. The yin and yang qi was vast and mighty, splitting heaven and earth and creating the two elements. Then, a resplendent golden bridge appeared. It was incomparably huge, like the Tao mark in the middle of the Taiji painting. It spanned across heaven and earth, separating the two elements, drawing yin and yang, and fixing the earth, fire, water, and wind. In an instant, a power that could suppress heaven and earth spread out from the golden bridge. Immediately, Feng Zichen felt that the space around him had solidified and a boundless pressure was generated, trying to crush him. The Taiji painting was used by Pangu to suppress the riot in the primordial world when he was opening the sky. Thinking about it, the Taiji painting at its peak could even suppress the primordial world, let alone Feng Zichen. However, the same Dharma treasure in the hands of different people would have different power. In Panga's hands, the Taiji painting could suppress the primordial world. However, in the hands of the Grand Pure One, the Taiji painting did not have such power. Although it was still very strong, it was not invincible. Zhouxing painting rise. With a thought, Feng Zichen raised the Zhouxing painting and developed a resplendent galaxy to resist the pressure brought by the Taiji painting. Compared to before, the power of the Zhouxing painting was even stronger. It was vaguely showing signs of breaking through to a superior grade, connate, cardinal treasure. Destruction and establishment were not only useful to cultivators, but also to Dharma treasures. During the battle with the fiend ancestor Rahu, the Zhouxing painting was severely injured. After the battle ended, Feng Zichen placed it in the core of the boundless starry sky and used the power of the stars to repair its injuries. This recovery would take several million years. When Feng Zichen took it out of the core of the boundless starry sky, not only did the Zhouxing painting recover completely, but its power also increased greatly. It was only a step away from forming the 48th connate divine restriction and becoming a superior grade connate cardinal treasure. Rumble. The golden bridge shook. A destructive power erupted, and the connate Tai Chi Chi wantonly surged into the starry sky above Feng Zichen's head. Immediately, the stars exploded one after another, and the galaxy withered. The vast starry sky was on the verge of collapse. The Zhouxing painting was no match for the power of the Taiji painting. Not to mention that the Zhouxing painting was not a superior grade connate cardinal treasure. Even if it was, it would not be a match for the Taiji painting. After all, although the Taiji painting was called a connate cardinal treasure, its power far exceeded this level. Rumble. In the blink of an eye, the starry sky above Feng Zichen's head shattered and turned into the Zhouxing painting again, flying back into his hand. Without the obstruction of the starry sky, the power of the Taiji painting directly affected Feng Zichen's body. The terrifying pressure was about to crush him. However, Feng Zichen did not care about that. He did not unleash his true strength, nor did he use the Hongmeng Daozhong. He treated it as if it did not exist. That was because he was not fighting alone. He had an ally. Seeing that the golden bridge, formed by the Taiji painting, was about to press down on Feng Zichen's body, a huge cauldron with 4 feet and 2 handles suddenly appeared in the middle of the two. The aura that could suppress the universe erupted and resisted the golden bridge. The supreme grade, connate cardinal treasure, the cosmic cauldron. Nuwa had finally attacked. Eldest senior brother, please stop. A faint voice sounded. Nuwa leaped in front of the Grand Pure One and interrupted his next actions. Junior sister Nuwa, do you want to be enemies with the poor Wei too? Seeing Nuwa stop him, the Grand Pure One's expression turned cold as he asked in a low voice. As he spoke, the Heavenly Lord of Primordial Beginning and the Grand Master of Heaven also moved. With a flash, they arrived behind the Grand Pure One and faced Nuwa together. The 3 Pure Ones were indeed the 3 Pure Ones. Even though they did not attack, just standing together gave people endless pressure. The chaos was destroyed silently. In the blink of an eye, thousands of kilometers of chaos turned into nothingness. Everything showed the power of the 3 Pure Ones. It's not that the poor Wei wants to be enemies with senior brother, but the heavenly Tao doesn't allow it. Not to mention that the Chaos Fiend Celestial is eyeing the primordial world covetously and can invade at any time. Let's talk about the two of you. One is the heavenly Tao Saint, and the other is the paragon of heaven and earth. What would happen if you fought with your life and death here because of a momentary dispute? Nuwa shook her head and said in a low voice. However, her words were clearly not convincing. Hee. The Grand Pure One only sneered at that. He continued to activate the Taiji painting and charge towards Feng Zichen. A mere Nuwa, how could she shake his decision? Although she had expected it, the Grand Pure One really did not give her face. Nuwa was still so angry that her face turned pale. She immediately raised the cauldron of heaven and earth and collided with the Taiji painting. However, the moment she attacked, the Heavenly Lord of Primordial Beginning and the Grand Master of Heaven also attacked. Panga's banner and the Immortal Vanquishing array appeared at the same time. They tore through the chaos and collided with the cauldron of heaven and earth, sending it flying far away. Being surrounded by the two of them, Nuwa was shocked and furious. She did not waste any time and directly revealed the Dharma idol of the human-headed snake god and charged towards the two of them. With Nuwa's strength, she was no match for one of them, let alone two of them. However, the two of them did not dare to attack her. In order to make up for the lack of heaven, Nuwa had destroyed her Tao body, causing her strength to regress. In order to compensate her, the heavenly Tao used the Qi of heaven and earth to reconstruct her Tao body. Although the body of heaven and earth merit was not as powerful as her previous Tao body, it was clearly more mysterious. At the very least, no one dared to hurt her. If anyone dared to damage the Tao body refined by the heaven and earth merit, they would definitely attract negative karma. Although the saints were not afraid of negative karma, their disciples were. If the negative karma could not hurt the saints, it would descend on their disciples. It could be said that if the Heavenly Lord of Primordial Beginning and the Grand Master of Heaven dared to attack Nuwa, they would not only lose their mystical abilities, but also the future of their disciples. Was it worth it to use the future of their disciples in exchange for Nuwa's injury? It was definitely not worth it. Nuwa was immortal and indestructible. If she was injured, it would be a loss of face. However, if the future of their disciples was gone, it would really be gone. The Grand Master of Heaven and the Heavenly Lord of Primordial Beginning were both smart people. Naturally, they knew how to choose. Therefore, after seeing Nuwa rush over, the two of them did not dare to make a move. They only used their methods to trap Nuwa so that she could not save Feng Zichin. Senior brothers, do you really want to make things difficult for the poor Wei? Trapped by the two of them, Nuwa said unhappily. Junior sister Nuwa, it's not that the poor Wei wants to be your enemy. It's that you're determined to be my enemy and the entire celestial sect of wonders. Your disciple, the Zichin clan, has created their own martial arts and shaken the foundation of our celestial sect of wonders. Instead of cleaning up the sect, you're protecting his good friend. What are your intentions? Do you still have the celestial sect of wonders in your eyes? The Heavenly Lord of Primordial Beginning smiled coldly. Not only did he not take Nuwa's threat seriously, but he also questioned her. Feng Zichin was from the human race. He was a disciple that the Nuwa had personally admitted. Moreover, he had the capital to show off to everyone back then. Now he had created his own martial arts and shaken the foundation of the celestial sect of wonders. He had become the greatest sinner of the immortal Tao. As his backer, it was natural for Nuwa to be angered by the people of the celestial sect of wonders. Hee. The martial arts created by Brother Gauchen can pose a threat to the immortal Tao. Doesn't that prove his excellence? The disciple is more outstanding than the teacher. Doesn't that mean that the Empress has taught well? Since that's the case, why is the Empress Nuwa angry? Could it be that I have to be like you, the Heavenly Lord of Primordial Beginning? All of your disciples are useless. After tens of millions of years, none of them have succeeded in proving their Tao. Is that how you're considered outstanding? Before Nuwa could reply, Feng Zichin, who was fighting the Grand Pure One, took the time to mock the Heavenly Lord of Primordial Beginning. His disciple's cultivation was not good enough. That was the pain in the Heavenly Lord of Primordial Beginning's heart. That was because his disciple could not prove his Tao. It was not that he was not outstanding enough, but that he had implicated him. Therefore, the Heavenly Lord of Primordial Beginning had always felt guilty towards his disciple. It was precisely because of that he had become abnormally protective. He wanted to use such a method to compensate his disciple. But now Feng Zichin used that to mock him. How could the Heavenly Lord of Primordial Beginning tolerate that? He exploded on the spot. Bastard, you're courting death. Grabbing the Panga banner, the Heavenly Lord of Primordial Beginning slashed fiercely at Feng Zichin. Rumble. Streaks of chaotic sword chi burst out, carrying traces of the heavenly god's murderous aura. They shattered the chaos and emitted a mighty force that could split the world. Back then, when the Pangu axe shattered, Pangu used the Panga banner to shatter the chaos and continue to split the world. Although the three heaven-splitting treasures were all the strongest Dharma treasures of the primordial world, their focus was different. The Taiji painting was a suppression treasure, the Pangu axe was a killing treasure, and the Chaos Bell combined the advantages of the two. It could attack and withdraw. For this reason, among the three heaven-splitting treasures, the Panga banner had the strongest killing power. It could even be said that in the primordial world, the Panga banner was the #1 killing treasure. In front of him was the Taiji painting, and behind him was the Panga banner. Facing the #1 suppression treasure and the #1 killing treasure of the primordial world at the same time, no matter how confident Feng Zichin was, he did not dare to say that he could block the attacks of the two. But he still did not panic, because he still had a trump card. Seeing the Taiji painting and the Panga banner charging over, Feng Zichin actually put away the Zhoxing painting, as if he had given up resisting. Just when everyone was puzzled, Feng Zichin shouted calmly, "Don't worry. Tao Ancestor, are you still not going to make a move? As soon as he finished speaking, the world fell silent in an instant. Then a sigh was heard. Then an unparalleled force erupted and brushed past everyone's bodies. Next, the world spun. When Feng Zichen came back to his senses, he found that he was no longer in the chaos outside the heavens, but in the purple cloud palace. Turning his head to look, he saw that the 6 sages had all appeared here. Obviously, the Tao Ancestor had used a supreme method to teleport them from the chaos outside the heavens to this place. Hiss! Thinking of this, Feng Zichen could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. Too powerful. The Tao Ancestor had probably reached the realm of the Wuji, Daluo, Jinxian. Otherwise, he would not have captured them so easily. One had to know that. When the Tao Ancestor made a move, they did not even notice it, let alone resist. If the difference in strength was not too great, such a situation would not have happened. Chapter 667. However, it was not like Feng Zichen had never seen a perfected primordial chaos existence. Back then, demon ancestor Luo Ho was at this realm. However, he definitely could not reach this level. If not, how could they have defeated demon ancestor Luo Ho back then? Since that was the case, then Tao ancestor Hongjuan's realm was self-evident. He must have surpassed the primordial chaos realm and reached the level of Wuji Daluo Jinxian. It was just that he did not know which level he had reached. However, even if it was the lowest level, the power it possessed was far from what the current Feng Zichen could contend with. Just now, he had been captured by Tao Ancestor Hongjun without any resistance. This was enough to prove this point. While feeling shocked, Feng Zichen could not help but look around to observe the performance of the other saints. However, what he saw in front of him were calm faces. However, the unconcealable shock in their eyes showed that they were not as calm as they appeared. Obviously, the strength displayed by Tao Ancestor Hongjun had deeply shocked them. That was also true. After cultivating hard for countless years, they had finally reached the realm of saints. Moreover, they had achieved good results on this path. They had thought that they could reach the realm of Tao Ancestor. But all of a sudden, he realized that the gap between them seemed to have become even bigger. Such an outcome was indeed a huge blow to the proud and arrogant saints. However, compared to the saints, Feng Zichen was much calmer, because he had cultivated to the primordial chaos realm in a short period of time. He had developed the confidence of being invincible. Although Tao Ancestor Hongjuan's realm was high, it was not unattainable. As long as he was given time, he would surpass him sooner or later. Feng Zichen was very confident about this. Once upon a time, saints were high and mighty figures in his eyes. But now, he had grown to the point where he was comparable to saints. Even among saints, there were only 1 or 2 people who were stronger than him to be able to surpass saints. Naturally, he could surpass Tao Ancestor Hongjun. Feng Zichen was no longer the human youth who struggled to survive in the past. He was now a well-deserved big shot in the untainted land. His every word and action could influence the general trend of the land and decide the rise and fall of countless races. It stood at the peak of the world. Ziwei greets Tao Ancestor. Nuwa, Tai Ching, greet Master. Jane, Junti greets Teacher. Suppressing the shock in their hearts, everyone stepped forward and bowed to Tao Ancestor Hongjun. After that, everyone stood there with their heads lowered, waiting for Tao Ancestor Hongjun's reprimand. As for what happened before, since Tao Ancestor Hongjun had intervened, it was naturally over. That's right, Tao Ancestor Hongjun was Feng Zichen's greatest trump card. Despite knowing that the 3 Pure Ones were present, he still dared to provoke the Grand Pure One. The reason was that Feng Zichen knew that Tao Ancestor Hongjun would not sit back and watch him get into trouble. To be more precise, the the heavenly axiom would not allow anything to happen to him. In the boundless starry sky, it was Feng Zichen's greatest protection. The heavenly axiom needed Feng Zichen to repair the boundless starry sky, and even strengthen the origin of the boundless starry sky to promote the advancement of the primordial world. For this, as long as Feng Zichen could not destroy the world, the heavenly axiom would always protect him. And this protection time would be as long as the lifespan of the world. He would truly be with the world. It could be said that as long as the world still needed the boundless starry sky, Feng Zichen would not really encounter any fatal danger. Even if he was besieged by the saints, he would still be able to turn the situation into a blessing. At most, he would be sealed in the boundless starry sky and could not come out. In a sense, Feng Zichen could be considered a different kind of saint. Under the protection of the heavenly axiom, he could already be like a saint and achieve immortality in the true sense of the primordial world. What he lacked was to mobilize the authority of the heavenly axiom. However, as the supreme being of heaven and earth, how could Feng Zichen lack the authority of the heavenly axiom? Even if he was not as good as a saint, it would not be that bad. Therefore, the saint did not have much of an advantage in front of him. That was not right either. At the very least, the vast sea of knowledge that the saint had accumulated over the countless years was what Feng Zichen lacked. Sai, you are also existences that have achieved the Tao. It's not appropriate to reprimand you like before. Therefore, the poor way will not say much today to avoid annoying people. However, I have something to remind you. I hope you will keep it in your hearts. In the future, when you attack, can you first consider whether the primordial world and the endless living beings can withstand your torment? Tao Ancestor Hongjun's words were not heavy, but in everyone's ears they were like a thunderclap. They were so frightened that they hurriedly stood up and said that they did not dare. All right, they are all figures like Saint Tao masters. How can they lose their composure in front of the poor way? Get up. Tao Ancestor Hongjun waved his sleeve, causing a gust of wind. Immediately, everyone felt a supreme force, causing them to be unable to bow. They could not help but be incomparably shocked. Thank you, Master, Teacher. Once again feeling the power of Tao Ancestor Hongjun, everyone did not dare to be rash. They hurriedly returned to their original positions and waited for the Tao Ancestor's instructions. All right, it's been hard on you all these years. Since all of you are here, and the poor way has recently made a breakthrough in her cultivation, I'll tell you about the path after primordial chaos. Perhaps it was because of the breakthrough in his cultivation, or perhaps it was because everyone had worked hard to guard the chaos outside the sky for so many years. In short, Tao Ancestor Hongjun was very happy and had the idea of preaching to everyone. Thank you, Master, Teacher. Hearing this, everyone was overjoyed. What kind of realm was Tao Ancestor Hongjun? He had already surpassed primordial chaos and reached the level of Wuji Daluo Jingxian. For such an expert to preach to them and elaborate on the cultivation path of the primordial chaos realm, it could be said to be a shocking opportunity. If they could comprehend something from it, it would save them a lot of detours and a lot of time. In that case, how could everyone not be happy? Perhaps the opportunity to advance further should be here. Not to mention how the Tao Ancestor preached in the Purple Cloud Palace. After Feng Zichen passed down the martial path, chaos gradually appeared in the primordial world, and this was inseparable from martial arts. What was martial arts? Some people said that it was to stop the spear for martial arts. Some people said that it was to use the spear for martial arts. However, whether it was to stop the spear or to use the spear, they both had the meaning of fighting. Martial meant fighting, and with fighting there would be chaos. Therefore, due to the gradual rise of martial arts experts often broke out into great battles. Moreover, there were many troubles caused by martial arts battles in various places, causing chaos in the primordial world to gradually appear. Logically speaking, even if martial artists like to fight, the human emperor ruled the primordial world and ordered all races. He should be able to control the situation. Moreover, no matter how bad he was, he should have the ability to suppress the chaotic situation within a certain range and not affect the entire primordial world. However, right under the nose of the human emperor, the chaos in the primordial world quickly spread to the entire primordial world with an irresistible force. As a result, the human emperor completely lost the ability to control the situation. By the time he came back to his senses and comforted the good people, the situation in the entire primordial world had already become a mess. The various races attacked each other and the war was endless. Many races took advantage of the chaos in the primordial world to target the heavenly cycle temple, causing the war to further worsen. There were also many powerful beasts that were unknown, extinct, or only existed in legends. They suddenly appeared out of nowhere and scattered all over the primordial world, causing chaos one after another. These chaos broke out almost at the same time. It was precisely because of this that the peace that had lasted for millions of years in the primordial world was suddenly broken and it fell into chaos again. And these things happened so together, of course, it could not be a coincidence. All of this was secretly pushed by someone. And the origins of the people who were secretly pushing all of this were a little complicated. There were great masters from the celestial sect of wonders, and there were also great masters from ancient races. In short, ever since the human race became the protagonist of the world, there were too many people who were jealous of the human race. There were too many people who wanted to take a share of the human race's destiny. If the human race had been developing steadily, they might not have been able to do anything to the human race. However, after the birth of martial arts, the celestial sect of wonders was furious and wanted to teach the human race a lesson. At the same time, they also used this as an excuse to restrict the development of the human race, lest their strength become too strong and exceed their control. The thoughts of the great masters of the celestial sect of wonders were very simple. If they could not deal with Fengzichin, could they not deal with the human race? Therefore, a series of conspiracies against the human race soon appeared in the primordial world. And the great masters hiding in the dark saw that the celestial sect of wonders had taken action. They also took action. However, their goal was not to target the human race, but to create chaos so that they could fish in troubled waters. These great masters hiding in the dark knew one thing very well, and that was, with the celestial sect of wonders around, it was very difficult for them to obtain benefits from the human race. Therefore, they simply did not target the human race, but focused on creating chaos. When the primordial world was completely chaotic, the human race and the celestial sect of wonders would have no time to take care of themselves. That would be their opportunity. Muddy water. It was easy to fish. Therefore, with this thought, these great masters hiding in the dark secretly unlocked the ancient seal and released the primordial mutants inside. Of course, there were also some great masters who released the exotic beasts that they had raised in the past from the secret realm and let them wreak havoc in the primordial world. This was the origin of the exotic beasts that had wreaked havoc in the primordial world. Countless years had passed since the creation of the world. The wild heaven and earth mutants had long been wiped out. Only a few of them were kept in the hands of those with great magical powers. Now, taking advantage of the chaos in the primordial world, they had released all of them. The impact on the primordial world could be imagined. One had to know. Those that could be called primordial mutants. They were jointly besieged by the innate saints and innate ferocious beasts. In the face of such powerful two sides, the heaven and earth mutants were naturally no match for them and were beaten back. However, they had the ability to be immortal and indestructible. No matter how the innate ferocious beasts and innate saints tried their best, they could not kill them. In desperation, these ancient era experts could only seal them to prevent them from continuing to break the rules of the primordial world. However, They did not expect that after countless years, in order to seek their own interests, some of the ancient era experts secretly opened the seal and released those heaven and earth mutants, taking the initiative to let them wreak havoc in the primordial world. This action was really hateful. After being sealed for countless years, the strength of those heaven and earth mutants could be said to have fallen to the freezing point. From the level of Daluo Jinxian, they had fallen to the level of a gold immortal. However, since they were heaven and earth mutants, their physical bodies were definitely not weak. They could even be said to be extremely strong, not much weaker than the innate ferocious beasts. These heaven and earth mutants had such strong physical bodies. Even if their strength had fallen, they were still not something that those gold immortal cultivators could resist. Chapter 668. Not to mention, the Xenogeneics also had those strange and unpredictable talents and abilities. Therefore, with these mutants around, it was hard for the Eldritch world to not be in chaos. Damned Xian sect, damned immortal path. At this moment, in the human emperor palace, the current human emperor of the human race, Si Wen-ming, Yu the Great, looked at the void in front of him with an ugly expression, cursing at the Xian sect. This was because his surroundings were covered in divine chains of order. They firmly trapped him within the emperor's palace, causing him to be unable to take a single step out of here. Without a doubt, this was the Xian sect's method. Although the divine chains of order did not have the slightest bit of a mortal Dao aura, the heavenly energy on the divine chains exposed their origins. It was this heavenly energy that could trap the human emperor, Si Wen-ming, who was comparable to a great perfection quasi-saint in the human emperor palace, unable to move. In the Eldritch world, other than the Xian sect's immortal path, which other force could control such powerful heavenly energy? The answer was none. The end of the immortal path was the heavenly path. The original intent of the immortal path was a description of the heavenly path. With the strength of the human race's fate, only the Xian sect could restrict the human emperor's movements. One had to know that the most terrifying thing about the Xian sect was not their long fate, but the fact that they had the largest number of great mediums in the Eldritch world. It could even be said that the Xian sect alone could represent all the forces in the Eldritch world. In front of this force, the human race, as the main character of the world, could not fight against it. Therefore, once the Xian sect took action, the human race fell into a passive position. Restricting the human emperor's freedom was the first step of the Xian sect against the human race. With the support of the human race's fate, the human emperor could unleash strength comparable to a great perfection quasi-saint in the Eldritch world. A great perfection quasi-saint was the top existence even in the heaven realm and Daluo sky, where experts were everywhere. Needless to say, a great perfection golden immortal was the pinnacle of the Eldritch world. Without a doubt, the human emperor with the strength of a great perfection quasi-saint was an invincible existence in the Eldritch world. Absolutely invincible. As long as the human emperor's presence, any schemes against the human race, no matter how perfect they were, would be useless. That was because in the face of absolute power, all schemes and tricks were unable to withstand a single blow. The strength of the human emperor was enough to sweep away everything in the untainted land. Therefore, the great masters of the celestial sect of wonders, who were well aware of this, used the fortune of the celestial sect of wonders to restrict the freedom of the human emperor as soon as they decided to deal with the human race. This was the only way. Only then could they deal with the humans with ease. Otherwise, they were afraid that as soon as they made a move, the human emperor on the other side would use his absolute power to defeat all their means. Furthermore, after restraining Wan Ren Huang, these great mediums from the celestial sect of wonders were worried that it would not be safe. Then they restrained the 9 supremes of the human race, Daluo Jinxian. The 9 Daluo Jinxian were ministers who assisted the human emperor. With the blessing of the luck of the human race, they were qualified to display strength beyond that of a gold immortal in the primitive world. The significance of its existence was similar to that of the 9 great kings of the ancient human tribe. It was a means for the human emperor to rule the untainted land. They were the mainstay of the human race. They were also a means for the human race to maintain stability. Their greatest role was to maintain the stability of the human race when the human emperor was not around. A long time ago, the human race had once imagined what the human race's situation would be like when the human emperor was not around. Therefore, they imitated the ancient 9-king system and set up 9 leaders for the human race. Their purpose was to deal with today's situation. But who would have thought that? The celestial sect of wonders would not make a move. Once they made a move, it would be earth-shattering. After trapping the human emperor, they also made a move to lock up the 9 Daluo Jinxian. It made the human race's preventive measures a complete joke. And this was the main reason for the chaos of the primitive world. With the vastness of the primitive world, without the suppression of a peerless expert, how could a few dozen Tai Jinxian-level existences control the situation? It would be strange if nothing happened. Open for me. In the human emperor palace, Si Wenming was naturally unwilling to be trapped here. He tried his best to activate Exenhua, trying to break through the divine chains of order to regain his freedom. But unfortunately, the foundation of the human race was still a little shallow. How could it be compared to the celestial sect of wonders that controlled the primitive world? Therefore, no matter how hard he tried, other than expanding his range of activities, there was no other effect. In the heavenly court, the North Star Emperor naturally noticed the abnormality of the human race at the first moment, but he did not make a move, because, just as he was about to make a move, he suddenly frowned. He sensed that outside the heavenly realm, there were hundreds of extremely powerful auras that firmly locked onto him. Without a doubt, as long as he dared to help the human race, what greeted him would be the joint attack of hundreds of great mediums. If it was a one-on-one battle, no matter how many great mediums came, the North Star Emperor would not be afraid. He could suppress them with a flip of his hand, but one against hundreds. Then he would have to think twice. Perhaps he would not be able to win. Moreover, even if his skills were better and he was lucky enough to win, the price he would have to pay would be unimaginable. Therefore, the North Star Emperor hesitated for a moment and slowly put down his right hand that he had stretched out. He could not make a move. Of course, if he could not make a move, then the hundreds of great mediums outside who were monitoring him could not make a move either. According to this calculation, if he were to drag out 100, he would not be at a disadvantage. It could even be said that he had made a profit. Good fellow. Hundreds of great mediums. The celestial sect of wonders is really willing to spend money. Sighing secretly, the North Star Emperor shook his head and said, he really did not expect the celestial sect of wonders to mobilize such a large force to deal with him. This really made people feel overwhelmed by favor from their superiors. In order to deal with me, fellow Taoists, you have really put in a lot of effort. It must not have been easy to gather so many fellow Taoists. The North Star Emperor calmed his mind and said in a clear voice, in his perception, the origins of the great divine masters who surrounded him outside were extremely complicated. Not only were there people from the celestial sect of wonders, but there were also many unfamiliar auras. The ancient Taoist charm that was inadvertently revealed made one's heart palpitate. Strong. Absolutely ridiculously strong. The strength of the experts who came from the ancient era was definitely stronger than that of the great mediums from the celestial sect of wonders. This did not mean that the great mediums of the celestial sect of wonders were not as talented as them, but that their experiences were different. In the ancient era, Daluo Jinxian should have been the end of the great Tao, the end of the cultivators. However, there were always some amazing existences who were unwilling to accept this. With their great wisdom and courage, they opened up another major realm after the golden immortal of the great firmament. That was a brand new realm, similar to the quasi-saint realm, but completely different. However, there was no doubt that it was a power that surpassed Daluo Jinxian. At that time, there was no such thing as a quasi-saint. Therefore, they were respectfully called Supremes by the innate saints at that time. Supremes Daluo, the Supremes of Daluo Jinxian, and also the Supremes of the primordial world. Tao ancestor Hongjun was once such a figure. Demon ancestor Luo was also once such a figure. Ancestral dragon, phoenix ancestor, and the other innate sacred beasts of the 5 elements, and even Wang Shu were also once such figures. They were all the supremes of the ancient era. Even if such an existence did not achieve the Tao, with their courage to open their own Tao, it was enough for them to have the strength comparable to primordial Daluo Jinxian in advance. Unlike primordial Daluo Jinxian, but better than primordial Daluo Jinxian, there were existences like them. After all, their foundation was too deep. This kind of existence, if they did not achieve the Tao, they would be fine. Once they achieved the Tao, they could be said to have soared into the sky. They could not be described as simply at the early stage of primordial chaos. Of course, it was precisely because their foundation was too deep that their path to achieving the Tao became extremely difficult. On this point, one could refer to the demon ancestor, Tao ancestor, and the 5 elements, sacred beasts. Their path to achieving the Tao was not simple. That had triggered a battle that had almost destroyed the primordial world. Such a difficult path to achieving the Tao was absolutely difficult to achieve with ordinary methods. For this reason, they would have an idea. They would attack the destiny of the human race. The destiny of the human race was really too much. It occupied half of the entire primordial world. If they could get a little bit of it, then their path to achieving the Tao would be much easier. It was with this idea that these ancient supremes who had entered a state of seclusion since the end of the ancient era finally could not suppress the thoughts in their hearts. They appeared in the primordial world after a long time and caused this turmoil, compared to achieving the Tao. So what if he had to sacrifice a little? As for the threat of the heaven and earth mutants, they had never taken it seriously. In the ancient era, when they were still weak, they could seal it. Not to mention, they were now much more powerful than they were back then. A mere heaven and earth mutant could be destroyed with a flick of a finger. The North Star Emperor understood the thoughts of the supreme beings of the ancient past. After all, after the human race became the protagonist of the world, it had attracted the attention of many people. Greedy gazes. The current human race was like a huge piece of fat meat that everyone wanted to take a bite of. If they wanted to solve this problem, it was simple. That was to fight, beat them ruthlessly. Only by beating those who dared to reach out their hands until they hurt and beat them ruthlessly, they would remember this lesson. Only then did they know that the human race was not to be trifled with. As for whether the human race could do this, Gauchen thought that it was still possible. Although the human race was in a mess now, that was because the human race had not reacted yet. When the human race came back to their senses and organized their strength, they could counterattack at any time and easily extinguish the chaos in the primordial world. The human race had dominated the primordial world for millions of years. The foundation that they had accumulated was not a joke. Even if it could not be compared to the shaman and demon race, it was far from what the current primordial world races could compare to. If a mere heaven and earth mutant wanted to defeat the human race, they would be underestimating the human race too much. If the human race was really so weak, it would be impossible for them to escape from the seal of the demon race. And the key to turning the situation around was the human emperor, Si Wenming. If he could appear in time, the situation of the human race would quickly stabilize, and they would be able to condense enough strength to suppress the chaos in various places. Perhaps this was the test of the world for Si Wenming. After passing, he would be the 9th great emperor of the human race. If he could not pass, then he could only be the king of the human race. The reason why Gauchen did not save Si Wenming was because of this consideration. As the human emperor, if he could not even solve such a small problem, what qualifications did he have to become the great emperor of the human race? Therefore, Emperor Gaochen made up his mind to completely let go of this matter and leave it all to Si Wenming to handle. He believed that Si Wenming could solve these matters, and he also believed that the human race had the ability to overcome these difficulties. Otherwise, the human race would be too lousy. If a mere disaster could make the human race unable to take care of themselves, then it would be better not to be the main character of this world. It would also save him from embarrassing himself there. After making up his mind, Gaochen seemed to have put down some burden and suddenly relaxed. He was also in the mood to communicate with those powerful beings in the dark. Fellow Taoists reply. Divine senses spread out from Gaochen's body and echoed between heaven and earth. Unfortunately, even though he released his divine senses so frequently, no one paid attention to him. Everyone's attention was now on the primordial land. They wished that they could directly divide the destiny of the human race. How could they have the time to pay attention to Gaochen? Moreover, Gaochen's mouth was so vicious. If they easily talked to him, they might be ridiculed by him. Therefore, everyone pretended to be deaf and mute, pretending that they did not hear Gaochen's words. At this moment, his gaze turned back to the human race. In the human emperor palace, Si Wenming, who had used all his methods, but still could not break the divine chains of order, could not help but reveal a hint of ruthlessness in his eyes. The human race must not be in chaos. Therefore, he had to go out. Even if he had to pay a price, he had to rush out. With this realization in his heart, Si Wenming did not hesitate to burn his origin to obtain a huge amount of power. Break for me! Unparalleled power surged out from Si Wenming's body. However, his target was not the divine chains of order in front of him, but the soul in his body. Boom! With a deafening boom, Si Wenming's body was blasted apart. At the same time, the destiny of the human race was also shaking nonstop. Waves of violent power surged out and entangled with the divine chains of order in the human emperor palace. Under this violent power, the divine chains of order that Si Wenming could not do anything about finally showed signs of collapsing. Bang, bang, bang. Amidst the shocking explosion, the divine chains of order that trapped Si Wenming broke one after another. However, at that moment, as if sensing the changes in the human emperor's palace, an extremely mysterious power surged out from the void and supported the divine chains of order. Suppress, it was a light word, but it carried an unparalleled power. The instant that voice rang out, the divine sequence chains that were originally in a state of collapse suddenly recovered their original state. Furthermore, they became even more powerful. Whoosh! As the divine chains of order swayed, an unparalleled power surged and suppressed the violent destiny of the human race once again. Si Wenming. He was also trapped again. However, unlike before, Si Wenming, who was suppressed again, had extremely empty eyes without the slightest bit of spirit. Chapter 669. This was the sign of his soul leaving his body. Obviously, Si Wenming had taken advantage of the time when the divine chains of order had collapsed and burned his origin as the price to escape a wisp of his soul. Although the consequence of doing so would greatly damage his cultivation, it was nothing compared to the stability of the human race. If his cultivation was lost, he could still cultivate it back. However, if the human race was finished, then it would really be finished. Outside the human emperor palace, as the void distorted, Si Wenming's blurry figure appeared. Haha! I finally rushed out. Cough, cough, cough! Looking at the human emperor palace behind him, Si Wenming could not help but smile. However, before he could be happy for long, his laughter was replaced by a violent cough. What was even more worrying was that as the cough sounded, Si Wenming's blurry figure became even more blurry. It was faintly discernible and showed signs of disappearing. Obviously, his situation was not good. That was also true. In order to rush out of the human emperor palace, he had paid too great a price. Not to mention that his origin had been burned to ashes. Even his physical body had been severely injured. Moreover, when he rushed out of the human emperor palace, his soul had been weakened layer by the divine chains of order and was already extremely weak. If not for the fact that he had been the human emperor for hundreds of thousands of years and had already condensed half of the imperial purple chi in his body, he would have been reduced to ashes by the divine chains of order. At this moment, I'm really too weak, not to mention ruling the human race. I can't even walk in front of everyone. I'm afraid that before I can see everyone, my soul will not be able to hold on and will collapse on its own. Therefore, the most important thing now is to recover some of my strength and condense a physical body again. This way, I can appear in front of everyone. With a plan in mind, Si Wenming did not hesitate. He immediately summoned the last of his strength and escaped into the imperial ancestral temple near the human emperor palace. He had been careless. If he had known that the celestial sect of wonders would attack him, he would not have stayed in the human emperor palace. Instead, he would have chosen to stay in the imperial ancestral temple of the human race. After all, compared to the human emperor palace, the imperial ancestral temple was the most important place of the human race. Even if the human emperor palace was related to the two galactic cosmic light arrays of the primordial world and the human race, its status was far from being comparable to the imperial ancestral temple. The imperial ancestral temple, that was the place where humans worshipped their ancestors. All the martyrs of the humankind since the birth of the humankind were enshrined in it. This was where the faith of the human race lay, and where their legacies lay. It contained the indestructible spirit of the human race, the spirit of man conquering nature. The fire was extinguished continuously, as long as the human race was not exterminated. Then the imperial ancestral temple will exist forever. The great powers from the celestial sect of wonders could seal the human emperor's palace, but they definitely could not seal the human race's ancestral temple. After countless years of worship by the human race, the imperial ancestral temple no longer carried the power of the human race, but also the power of the human race. The spirit of the human race was that man could conquer the heavens. Without a doubt, this was looking down on the heaven Tao. How could man win against the heavens? It was only right that divine abilities were no match for the heavens. Any existence that dared to defy the heavens had completely disappeared from the world. All of this had been proven by history. But even so, the human race still dared to shout the slogan, "Man can conquer the heavens." Of course, this was not because the human race was stubborn, but because the human race had something to rely on. This reliance was the human Tao. As a postnatal race created by Nuwa to make up for the lack of the human Tao, the human race had an advantage that the other races did not, and that was that they were closer to the human Tao. It was precisely because of this advantage that some of the activities of the human race could repeatedly resonate with the human Tao. It was also because of this that the human race could stand out from the encirclement of the connate life forms as postnatal life forms. It was undeniable that postnatal life forms were inferior to connate life forms in every aspect. After all, they were favored by the heavens. If the human race did not have any outstanding advantages, how could they defeat the connate life forms? Being close to the human Tao. This was the human race's greatest advantage. With the support of the human Tao, the human race obtained unparalleled creativity, and from then on, they stood out from the primordial world and became the main characters of the world. The spirit of the human Tao had long been imprinted in the human race's bones, and was passed down through the bloodline from generation to generation. As such, it was no wonder that the human race would shout the slogan, "Man can conquer the heavens." It was a spirit that was engraved in the bones, an instinct that could not be erased or forgotten. Even the heavens and the earth would be moved by it. The human race was born with the human Tao, and they practiced the spirit of the human Tao in the primordial world, spreading the glory of the human Tao. What could the heavenly Tao do? That was not defying the heavens, it was following the human Tao. The word human Tao had exhausted all things. With the human Tao as their backing, the heavenly Tao could not do anything to the human race. It could only allow that person's spirit to conquer the heavens, to be passed down through the generations of the human race. Think about it. Even the heavenly Tao could not do anything to the imperial ancestral temple. What ability did the celestial sect of wonders have to touch the imperial ancestral temple? Not to mention Niwa, Feng Zichen, and the statues of the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors were also enjoying the offerings of the human race in the imperial ancestral temple. It was likely that as soon as the celestial sect of wonders made a move, Niwa and Feng Zichen would immediately sense it and stop all of this from happening. Therefore, the imperial ancestral temple was the safest place for the human race. If Si Wenming hid in the imperial ancestral temple, then unless Tao ancestor Hongjun personally took action or the 3 pure ones personally descended, the celestial sect of wonders would not be able to touch him in the slightest. However, the human emperor living in the imperial ancestral temple was just talk. Of course, it was impossible to really do it. In the end, the imperial ancestral temple was also a place to worship the ancestors. It was fine for a short period of time, but if the human emperor lived here all the time, what would it be like? Time was like flowing water. In the blink of an eye, 1,000 years had passed. The situation in the untainted land had become even worse. However, at this moment, the human emperor Si Wenming finally walked out of the imperial ancestral temple. Sigh. In the end, the time is too short. My strength has only recovered a little, and my physical body has not been able to revert to the body of an innate god-fiend. However, time does not wait for me now. I can't care so much. Si Wenming, who walked out of the imperial ancestral temple, looked at his new body and could not help but sigh in disappointment. However, in 1,000 years, even if he did his best, how much cultivation could he recover? Originally, with the support of the human race's destiny, although Si Wenming's cultivation was only half a step away from Daluo Jingxian, his strength was comparable to that of a great perfection sage-to-be. However, as he forced his way out of the human emperor's palace, his divine soul escaped, but the human race's destiny was still locked in the human emperor's palace. This meant that Si Wenming, who had lost the human race's destiny, had returned to his original state. He was only half a step away from Daluo Jingxian. If that was the case, it was fine. Although a half-step golden immortal was not strong enough, he could be regarded as an overlord in the current, untainted land, though he might not be invincible in the present age. However, because of the burning of his origin, Si Wenming's realm fell. He fell from half a step away from Daluo Jingxian to the level of a golden immortal. Moreover, his physical body, which was comparable to an innate god-fiend, could not be brought out of the human emperor's palace. The physical body that he had now was just a recondensed one that he had spent 1,000 years to refine. It had just reached the level of an innate life form. Weak, too weak. Although the golden immortal realm was the limit of combat strength in the untainted land, innate life forms in the golden immortal realm could be found everywhere in the untainted land. He could not be considered an expert. Si Wenming was the only one who knew the difference between an invincible warrior of the untainted land and an ordinary expert. However, it did not matter if his cultivation level was low or his strength was weak. Si Wenming still had half of the imperial purple qi and the innate treasure, the human emperor's seal. Although these 2 treasures were not enough to let him continue to be invincible in the untainted land, they were enough to ensure his safety and prevent him from being killed. As soon as he came out of the imperial ancestral temple, Si Wenming did not have time to sigh about his luck. He immediately used the human emperor's seal to issue several orders to announce his existence. After the human emperor appeared, the human race's people were relieved. What happened after that was much simpler. Si Wenming did not care about the situation in the untainted land. He immediately gathered all his strength to help the elders and leaders of the human race stabilize the situation of the human race. Only when the human race was stable would they have enough strength to calm the chaos in the untainted land. You're out so soon. You didn't disappoint me. It's just a little tragic. The physical body is broken, the origin is scattered, and the soul is weak. These injuries are more serious than the last. It's not easy to recover. In the heavenly court, after seeing that the situation of the human race was gradually stabilizing, the North Star Emperor already knew that Si Wenming had broken out of the seal. He could not help but smile. However, different from his happy mood. The faces of the Almighties who were hiding in the dark all turned ugly when they heard the news that Si Wenming had broken out of the seal. What a variable! Si Wenming's appearance had brought too much uncertainty to their plans. It would even cause their plans to completely collapse. Therefore, Si Wenming could not be left alive. Moreover, if they could kill the human emperor of the human race, it would undoubtedly be a huge blow to the morale of the human race. It might even cause the human race to fall apart. With this thought in mind, these great divinities hiding in the dark could not help but have the intention to kill Si Wenming. However, although they had the intention to kill, they did not choose to take action immediately. Because they had concerns in their hearts. After all, he was the human emperor. His status was incomparably noble. He had the karmic position of heaven and earth. If they killed him for no reason, they would inevitably attract karmic power. Normally, they might not care about these karmic powers. But now, everyone was on the verge of attaining the Tao. If they rashly attacked and killed the human emperor, they would probably never be able to attain the Tao. For this reason, no one was willing to make a move. It was not impossible to make a move. But who would bear the responsibility? No one could bear the responsibility. No one was willing to give up the opportunity to attain the Tao to kill the human emperor. Therefore, everyone seemed to be very hesitant. However, their hesitation did not last long, because Si Wenming's next action made them make up their minds. They had to get rid of the human emperor. In less than 1,000 years, Si Wenming had stabilized the situation of the human race and integrated a large number of living forces to put into calming the chaos of the primordial world. At this moment, the dignity that the human race had accumulated for millions of years was undoubtedly displayed. As soon as the human race made a move, the 10,000 races that were shouting and killing each other immediately became obedient. Not only did they stop fighting each other, but they also took the initiative to send troops to cooperate with the human race to calm the chaos of the primordial world. With the help of the 10,000 races, the human race's pace of calming the chaos was undoubtedly much faster. Soon, a large number of primordial mutants were either captured or killed. Even the immortal heaven and earth mutants could not stop the human race's footsteps. That's right. The heaven and earth mutants were very strong and brought a lot of trouble to the human race. However, no matter how big the trouble was, it was not difficult for the human race. If one person was not a match for the heaven and earth mutants, then 10 people, 100 people, 1,000 people, 10,000 people. Even ants could bite an elephant to death. Not to mention people. The thing that the human race did not lack the most was people. Quantitative change was enough to trigger qualitative change. Hundreds of golden immortals joined forces to set up a large array. The power that erupted could not kill the heaven and earth mutants, but it could also seal them. Even if it was only a temporary seal, as long as the primordial world was stabilized and Si Wenming's power returned, he would be able to suppress them with a flip of his hand. In this chaos of the primordial world, the human race no longer hid their strength. They swept across the entire primordial world with absolute strength, wanting to calm the chaos in one fell swoop. In fact, there was no need for the human race to hide their strength. They had already been forced to this extent. If the human race still showed that they could not withstand a single blow, it would only encourage the arrogance of the person behind them. At the same time, it would also attract more prying eyes. It was a disaster for a child to cause trouble with gold. The destiny of the human race was gold, and the people hiding in the dark were spying on the existence of gold. If the human race didn't show how strong they would definitely be eaten up by the others, including their skin and bones. Only by showing unparalleled strength could they intimidate the eyes that were secretly spying on the human race. The stronger the human race was, the more those who were spying on the human race had to consider whether it was worth risking their lives for a little destiny. The more people feared, the safer the human race would be. Hiding their strength during the development period was to shock the world. They had already reached the peak. If they continued to hide their strength, they would be inviting trouble. The protagonist of heaven and earth. Who would not spy on them? One had to know. If one pretended to be a pig for too long, one would really become a pig. It was also time for the human race to reveal their claws and fangs. When the human race moved, that tyrannical foundation of his was clearly displayed. The heaven and earth mutants that had previously stirred up the primordial world were quickly suppressed. It did not take long for the chaos that had affected more than half of the primordial world to show signs of being completely calmed. It was precisely when they saw the scene. Only then would the great divines who were hiding in the dark make up their minds. They were in a hurry. If the chaos of the primordial world was quelled by the human race, what else could they play? All their plans could be declared a failure. Not only did they not get any benefits, but they also got into trouble and offended the North Star Emperor to death. This deal was undoubtedly a huge loss. P.S. I beg for more monthly votes. In addition, there will be no limit tomorrow. There will definitely be a burst of updates. As for whether there will be a burst of updates in the future, it depends on the results. The better the results, the more updates. If it can be a high-quality product, I can update it every day. I can even get rid of the bad habit of playing games. Chapter 670. Great practitioners were all shrewd people. They would never engage in a losing business. Now they were about to lose money, and they had to pay a price that was enough to hurt them. Say, would they allow this to happen? Of course not. In order to target the human race, they had already invested too much. Once they failed, the loss would definitely be unimaginable. In fact, the price they had to pay would exceed the limit they could bear. Therefore, the great divines hiding in the dark would never allow this plan to fail. If the human emperor hindered their plan, then they would make the human emperor disappear. As soon as this thought came to mind, everyone had the intention to kill. Therefore, they tacitly looked around. Of course, it was impossible for one person to do such a big thing as killing the human emperor. The best thing was for everyone to do it together. In this way, even if the karma came with everyone sharing it, their pressure would be reduced a lot. Perhaps, after everyone shared the pressure, the consequences of killing the human emperor would not be a big deal. The consequences of killing the human emperor would be great, but they had the advantage in numbers. Each of them would bear a share of the responsibility. Perhaps this matter would be fooled. After all, if they joined forces, they would be able to control the general trend of heaven and earth. They might be able to erase the impact of killing the human emperor. Thinking of this, the worry in everyone's hearts lessened a lot. Fellow Taoists, we can't delay any longer. If we delay any longer, the chaos of the primordial world might be quelled by the human emperor. Therefore, we can't hesitate any longer. The poor way knows that you are unwilling to bear the karma of killing the human emperor. This is normal. After all, it is the supreme karma of heaven and earth. It is ominous to kill. But we don't have to kill him. Just like before, we can find an opportunity to continue sealing the human emperor. Of course, we have to pay a price to forcefully seal the human emperor. But if everyone here works together, that price is nothing. Just as everyone was secretly plotting, a sudden voice echoed in everyone's ears, breaking the long silence. Who is it? Everyone could not help but be shocked. They hurriedly released their divine senses to scan the surroundings. However, no matter how they searched every corner of the void, they could not find the source of the sound. Obviously, the person who spoke did not want to reveal his identity. In such a situation, even if the human race was angry, it would not be good for them to find trouble with everyone present. That would be too exaggerated and impossible. However, if the human race was determined to target a few of them, there would be no problem. Who would the human race target then? Without a doubt, the human race would target whoever performed the best in this plan against the human race. The person who spoke dared to collude with everyone to seal the human sovereign. There was no doubt that he was the primary target of the human clan. Once his identity was exposed, no matter who he would be hunted down endlessly by the human clan until he died. This was related to the dignity of the human race. It was useless for anyone to plead for mercy. Therefore, everyone understood that person's unwillingness to reveal his identity. At that moment, he did not investigate the identity of that person. He just nodded secretly to show that he agreed with his suggestion. There was nothing he could do even if he didn't agree, because this was the best choice at the moment. There was no other way. Great. Since everyone agrees with the poor way suggestion, we'll take action together to seal the human sovereign in one breath's time. Seeing that everyone nodded, the person spoke again. At that moment, no one responded. However, their attitude of secretly accumulating power had already revealed everything. Very soon, one breath's time passed, and it was time for everyone to take action. Take action! A voice was heard. Almost at the same time, everyone mobilized their magic power and was about to attack the human sovereign. However, just as they took action, an extremely dazzling sword light flew out from the heavenly court. It cut through the layers of void and swept toward them. Quick dodge! It's the North Star Emperor. Knowing who the person was, everyone did not have the heart to fight against him. They did not have the time to deal with the human sovereign. The moment before the sword light exploded, they all rushed out as fast as they could so that they could escape from the range of the sword light. However, Great Emperor Gaochen's attack was too fast. Before he attacked, there was no sign at all. Therefore, even though the great magicians who were hiding in the dark were extremely fast, there were still some who were unable to escape from the range of the sword light. Rumble, boundless sword light exploded as though it was splitting the heaven and earth apart. It was clear and turbid yin and yang. It stirred up the earth, fire, water, and wind, and destroyed the void that everyone was hiding in. Ah, a few screams were heard. The few people who fell behind were sucked into the sword light. In an instant, they were torn into pieces by the terrifying sword light together with their physical bodies and primordial spirits. Very soon, they disappeared completely. After everything calmed down, a few connate spiritual treasures with a few broken connate true spirits could be seen rushing out from the void that was destroyed by the sword light. Obviously, they were the great divines who did not manage to escape in time and were severely injured by the sword light of the North Star Emperor. Their physical bodies were shattered, their primordial spirits were shattered, and even their connate, undying true spirits were broken. Wasn't that a serious injury? It could be seen that the North Star Emperor was ruthless. Swoosh! A few powerful great mediums saw the innate spiritual treasures dashing out and protected them without hesitation. They wanted to prevent the North Star Emperor from continuing to attack and killing them. No matter what, they were in an alliance to fight against the North Star Emperor. If they were to allow the severely injured people to be killed by the North Star Emperor, everyone would be in danger. The alliance that was not considered reliable to begin with would only exist in name. Before the enemy was dealt with, the alliance would only exist in name. Then, when the North Star Emperor came, how were they going to defend against him? Therefore, no matter what, they had to protect the alliance. Even if it was just for show, they had to maintain the stability of the alliance to prevent the North Star Emperor from finding an opportunity to destroy them one by one. Protecting the injured allies was the first step, and it was also a necessary step. Sigh. In the heavenly court, the North Star Emperor who saw the scene couldn't help but sigh. He took back the thought of continuing to attack. Everyone reacted quickly and did not give him a second chance to attack. Otherwise, he might have the chance to kill a few great divines. However, the chances of that happening were not high. Those who could reach this stage would have some trump cards in their hands. How could they die so easily? One had to know that this was the primordial world with an incomparably deep foundation. If it was another world, primordial chaos experts could naturally do it. However, the primordial world could not. There was no other reason. Its foundation was too deep. The primordial world was built on the corpses of a large number of chaos demon gods, whose strength far exceeded the primordial chaos realm. This also created the primordial world's incomparably deep origin. For this reason, some special existences could always be born in the primordial world. These things could either save one's life or trick others, but without exception, these special existences were far more mysterious than one could imagine. They might have the ability to fight against primordial chaos experts. In short, with the strength of the primordial world, it was not strange for anything to be born. Therefore, as long as it was not a one-on-one situation, even if the North Star Emperor was in existence on a level of primordial chaos Daluo Jinxian, he did not dare to say that he had the confidence to completely kill several great divines. They all hid too well. No matter how narcissistic the North Star Emperor was, he did not dare to guarantee that he was the only actor in the primordial world. Who knew? There might be others who acted better than him. If he was accidentally acted by others, it would be awkward. In particular, the North Star Emperor was certain that among the many great divines in the primordial world, there were definitely more than one saint. Perhaps among the group of great divines in front of him, there might be a saint. Therefore, the North Star Emperor did not dare to go too far. If he accidentally forced the other party into a corner and fought to the death with him, he would be in big trouble. The means of a saint might not be weaker than him. They were figures who had existed since the creation of the world, who knew how many treasures they had in their hands. Since they had already opened up their identities, they must have prepared a lot of good things for them. It was not impossible for them to temporarily possess the combat strength of a primordial chaos expert. It was because of this that the North Star Emperor decided to focus on stability. In the end, it was still because the human race was too weak. If the human race had 4 or 5 primordial chaos Daluo Jinxian, the North Star Emperor would not care about the identity of a saint. He would have long pushed them over. Ah, fellow Taoists, don't you think it's too much? When the human emperor of our race was sealed, I did not make a move to save him. But now that the human emperor of our race has just broken the seal, you are in a hurry to make a move on him. Your table manners are really unsightly. After putting away the Zichin sword, the North Star Emperor mocked everyone. Your Majesty, you must be joking. The Poor Way and the others have no intention of making a move on the human emperor. They just want to help the human emperor when they see that the primordial world is in chaos. One of them laughed dryly and went forward to explain. Hee, help. I think it's more of a hindrance. It seems that the primordial world is not chaotic enough. Are you planning to add more fuel to the fire? How could the North Star Emperor believe such nonsense? He continued to mock them. It's fine if your Majesty doesn't believe me. The poor way and the others just won't make a move. That person saw that the North Star Emperor's words were unpleasant. After laughing a few times, he stopped talking. So, the place fell into silence again. However, under this silence, there was an invisible undercurrent surging crazily. Fellow Taoists, it's already come to this. If you still have any tricks up your sleeves, don't hide them anymore. Hurry up and use them. Otherwise, after a period of time, the human race will completely pacify the primordial world. Then, all our previous efforts will be in vain. With the North Star Emperor around, it was no longer realistic to make a move on the human emperor. Everyone could not help but feel more anxious. Time waits for no one. To be honest, these powerful existences were also very depressed. As the saying goes, every dog has its day. However, they did not expect it to change so quickly. Previously, they worked together to stop the North Star Emperor from helping the human emperor. But now, the situation was completely reversed. It was the North Star Emperor's turn to stop them from making a move on the human emperor. Wasn't this retribution coming a little too quickly? Could this be the effect of the providence of the protagonist of heaven and earth? It made it difficult for the other forces to harm the human race. However, with so many forces working together, their providence should have suppressed the human race. After all, the providence of the human race was only half of the providence of all the races in the primordial world. It was not half of the entire primordial world's providence. With so many forces working together, what they mobilized was the providence of the blessed grotto heavens and the connate Tao providence. Whether it was the quality or quantity, it suppressed the human race. Therefore, the providence of the human race should not be so prosperous at this moment. However, although they were confused, their actions were not slow. They all used their trump cards. They had already invested so much in the beginning. Now, they could no longer retreat. Anyway, if they retreated this time, they would not be able to obtain the forgiveness of the human race. Then they would go all the way. What if they won? The benefits they would obtain would undoubtedly be shocking. All right, we have to admit, these great divination masters were gambling. However, wasn't life a huge gamble? If they won the gamble, their future would be bright. If they lost the gamble, there was nothing to lose. Since that was the case, why not block it? There was no way for them to turn back. Rumble. The moment these powerful existences' backup plans were activated, orders were sent out from the various blessed grotto heavens. Immediately, dozens of connate races that had submitted to the human race rebelled. In the name of the human race being tyrannical, they led ice to attack the human race. At the same time, hundreds of connate races that had long submitted to the powerful existences rushed out from the dojos of those powerful existences and charged towards the human race. For a moment, the human race became the target of everyone in the primordial world. Even the excuse was ready-made. The human race was tyrannical, so much so that they were sinned by the heavens. They sent down the mutants of heaven and earth to cause chaos in the primordial world, disturbing the foundation of the human race's rule. For this, these connate races obeyed the mandate of the heavens and mobilized troops. They thought that the heavens and earth would get rid of this thief and overthrow the rule of the human race. The human race, who was suppressing the mutants of heaven and earth, was suddenly stabbed in the back by the connate races. They were flustered. However, the human race was strong after all. The rebellion of a few dozen connate races did not cause much of an impact. They could be suppressed very quickly. On the other hand, the connate races that walked out of the dojos of the powerful existences were somewhat difficult to deal with. Unlike the connate races that were still in the primordial world, the connate races that were in the dojos of the powerful existences were not affected by the change of the world at all. Their bloodlines did not degenerate and still maintained the purity of their connate bloodlines. Because of that, they were extremely powerful. Moreover, there was also an irreconcilable blood feud between these connate races and the human race. They would rather leave the primordial world than live under the same sky as the human race. This had already explained everything. These Khanate races were all the main forces in the Khanate Alliance back then. You're tuning in to the Thunder Spear YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.